Do you hear it? The secrets lying beneath the city's silence are waking up. I am NightSleepWhisper, and tonight, we will open that famous diary hidden on the dusty shelves of apartment 4B. As we follow Elena and David through this 50-chapter journey, you'll feel every word bringing you closer to peace and sleep. Free your mind, and discover the truth among the shadows with me. Sleep well. The sun was behind the clouds. It was a grey afternoon in the city. Elena stood in front of a tall building. The building was made of old, grey stone. It looked very strong and very old. In her hand, Elena held a heavy silver key. This was the key to her new life. Today was moving day, and she was ready for a change. She walked to the back of her small car. The car was full of brown boxes. She took the smallest box first. It was not heavy, but she moved slowly. She walked through the front door of the building. The air inside was cool and smelled like old wood. The floor was made of white and black tiles. Elena looked for an elevator, but she did not see one. She saw a long set of wooden stairs. Elena began to climb the stairs. Her shoes made a soft sound on the wood. She reached the second floor, then the third. Finally, she arrived at the fourth floor. She was breathing hard because of the exercise. She looked at the doors in the hallway. She saw 4A, and then she saw 4B. This was her new home. She put the silver key into the lock and turned it. The door opened slowly. The apartment was completely empty. The walls were white, but the paint was old and a little dirty. There was a large window in the living room. Elena walked to the window and looked out. She could see the busy street below. There were many cars and people. The city was loud, but inside the apartment, it was very quiet. A little sunlight started to come through the window. It made the dust in the air look like tiny stars. Elena went back to her car many times. She carried more boxes up the stairs. Her arms felt very tired. Her legs were sore. One box was very heavy because it was full of kitchen tools and heavy plates. She carried it carefully. On the third floor, she saw a man. He was tall and had short grey hair. He was wearing a blue sweater and dark trousers. "Hello," the man said. His voice was deep. "Are you the new neighbor?" "Yes," Elena said. She put the box down for a moment to rest. "I am Elena. I am moving into apartment 4B. I am Mr. Miller," the man said. He did not smile. He looked at Elena's boxes with interest. That apartment was empty for a long time. Nobody wanted to live there. "I like it," Elena said. "It is a good size for me." Mr. Miller looked up the stairs toward her door. "Yes, it is a good size. But it is a very quiet floor. Sometimes it is too quiet." He did not say anything else. He turned and walked into his own apartment. Elena thought he was a little bit strange, but she did not worry. She picked up her box and finished the walk to the fourth floor. Inside her kitchen, she put the heavy box on the floor. She looked at the wooden cabinets. They were dark and old. She opened a box and took out a small kettle. She wanted to make some tea and sit down. She looked at the empty rooms and felt a mix of happiness and fear. She was alone in a new place. She hoped this apartment would be a happy home for her. The next morning, the sun was bright. Elena woke up early. She slept on a small mattress on the floor because her bed was not ready yet. She felt a little stiff, but she was excited. Today was cleaning day. She wanted every corner of her new home to be perfect. She went to the small bathroom and washed her face with cold water. Then, she went to the kitchen. She had a bucket, some soap, and a soft yellow cloth. She started with the kitchen cabinets. They were very old and had a lot of dust. She opened the first cabinet and began to scrub the wood. The work was hard. Elena climbed onto a small chair to reach the top shelves. She moved her cloth into the deep corners. She found some old pieces of paper and a small plastic spoon. She threw them into a trash bag. After an hour, her arms were tired, but the left side of the kitchen was clean. She moved to the cabinets near the window. These cabinets were very deep. Elena reached her hand all the way to the back. Her fingers touched something hard and cold. It did not feel like wood. It felt like leather. "What is this?" she whispered to herself. She pulled the object out. It was a small book. The cover was a dark, dusty red color. It was held shut by a small black rubber band. Elena sat down on the floor and put her cloth in the bucket. She wiped her hands on her trousers and took the book. She carefully removed the rubber band. The red cover felt soft in her hands. She blew the dust off the top. The book was a diary. She opened the first page. The paper was yellow, and the handwriting was neat and small. On the first page, there was a name. David Miller. Elena stopped. Miller. She thought. Is he related to the neighbor downstairs? She turned the page. The dates in the diary were from last year. Elena started to read the first few lines. January 10th. I moved into apartment 4B today. The building is quiet. I think I will like it here. I need a place to think and work. The manager seems nice, but the neighbors stay in their rooms. Elena felt a strange shiver. She was sitting in the same spot where David sat a year ago. She turned more pages. The writing changed. In the beginning, the sentences were long and happy, but after a few weeks, the writing became messy. The words were bigger and looked hurried. February 15th. I saw him again. The man in the grey coat was standing across the street. He was looking at my window. I don't think it is a coincidence anymore. Elena looked at her window. The street was busy, but she did not see any men in grey coats. She looked back at the diary. March 2nd. I am hiding this diary. If someone is reading this, please listen. I did not go away because I wanted to. I am in danger. Elena closed the book quickly. Her heart was beating fast. The apartment felt different now. It was not just an empty room. It was a place with a secret. She looked at the red diary in her lap. She knew she should keep cleaning, but she could only think about David. Who was he? And why was he afraid? Elena sat on the wooden floor for a long time. She did not move. The red diary was open in her lap. She felt a little bit like a spy. She knew it was wrong to read someone's private thoughts. But David was missing. Maybe the diary could help him. She opened the book again and turned to the middle. David wrote about his job. He worked at a big office in the center of the city. He was an accountant. He worked with numbers and money every day. He liked his job because it was quiet and organized. He did not like surprises. But then, a big surprise happened. March 10th. Elena read aloud. Her voice was small in the empty room. Today I found a mistake in the books at work. It was not a small mistake. It was a lot of money. Millions of dollars were missing. I told my boss, Mr. Thorne. He told me not to worry. He said he would fix it. But I saw his face. He looked angry, not happy that I found the error. Elena stopped reading. She looked at the white walls of her apartment. Was this the reason David was in danger? Did he find out a secret about money? She continued to read. March 15th. I think Mr. Thorne is watching me. I saw a car outside my building last night. It was a black car with dark windows. It stayed there for 3 hours. I am scared to go to work tomorrow. I do not trust anyone at the office anymore. Elena felt a cold chill on her arms. She thought about her neighbor. Mr. Miller. Was he David's father? Or was he just a stranger with the same last name? She remembered the man she met on the stairs. He was not very friendly. He looked like he was hiding a secret. The entries in the diary became shorter. David wrote about being followed to the grocery store and the park. He felt like he was in a cage. He was always looking over his shoulder. March 25th. The diary said, "I cannot stay here. They are coming for the papers. I have to hide everything. If they find me, they find the truth. I will put the diary in the kitchen. It is a safe place. I hope a good person finds it one day." Elena touched the yellow page. David was the last tenant of this apartment. He lived here, cooked here, and slept here. Now, he was gone. The apartment was not really empty. It was full of David's fear. Elena stood up. She looked at the kitchen cabinet again. She wondered if David hid anything else. She felt like she was in a mystery movie. But this was her real life. She was a woman in a new city. And she had a big problem. She decided to keep the diary. She did not want to call the police yet. She wanted to know more first. She walked to the window. The sun was going down. The sky was orange and pink. She saw a man walking on the sidewalk below. He was wearing a long coat. He stopped and looked up at the building. Elena moved away from the window quickly. Her heart was beating fast. Was it the same man from the diary? Or was she just nervous? She needed to talk to Mr. Miller. Elena did not sleep well that night. Every time the old building made a noise, she opened her eyes. She thought about David and the man in the gray coat. In the morning, she drank a cup of coffee and made a decision. She needed to talk to Mr. Miller. He was the only person she knew in the building. Maybe he knew what happened to the man who lived in her apartment before her. She walked out of her apartment and closed the door. The hallway was long and quiet. She walked down the stairs to the third floor. She found the door to Mr. Miller's apartment. She stood there for a moment. Her hands were cold. She felt nervous, but she tapped on the heavy wooden door 3 times. A minute passed. Elena heard the sound of a lock turning. The door opened just a few inches. Mr. Miller looked out. He was wearing the same blue sweater from the day before. His eyes were tired, and he looked like he had not slept either. "Yes?" he asked. He did not open the door wider. "Hello, Mr. Miller. It is Elena from apartment 4B. Do you have a minute to talk?" Mr. Miller sighed. He looked behind him into his dark apartment, then looked back at Elena. "Is there a problem with the water? Or the heater?" "No," Elena said. She took a deep breath. "I found something in my apartment. A diary. It belonged to a man named David. I saw your last name is also Miller. Was he your relative?" The change in Mr. Miller's face was fast. His skin became very pale. He gripped the edge of the door with his hand. He looked left and right at the empty hallway. He looked very worried. "Why are you asking about him?" he whispered. His voice was shaking. "I'm just curious," Elena said. "The diary says he was in trouble. I want to know if he is okay." Mr. Miller stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood very close to Elena. "Listen to me, Elena. You are new here. This is a quiet building. People like it that way. You should not look for things that are not yours." "But he lived in my room," Elena said. "He was afraid of a man in a gray coat. He was afraid of his boss, Mr. Thorne. Do you know them?" Mr. Miller put a finger to his lips. "Be quiet," he hissed. "Do not say those names here. David was a good man. But he was too curious. Like you. Is he your son? Elena asked softly. Mr. Miller did not answer. He looked at the floor. His eyes were full of sadness and fear. Go back to your apartment. Elena. Put that book away. Forget you found it. It is better for everyone. He turned around, opened his door quickly, and went inside. Elena heard the heavy sound of the lock clicking. She stood alone in the hallway. She felt more afraid than before. Mr. Miller was not just a grumpy neighbor. He was a man who was living in fear. And now, Elena knew that David's danger was very real. Elena went back to her apartment quickly. She closed the door and turned the lock twice. She felt safe inside, but her heart was still beating very fast. Mr. Miller's face was stuck in her mind. He was so pale and his eyes were so full of fear. Why was he afraid of names? Why did he want her to stop looking? Elena sat at her small kitchen table. The red diary was there. It looked like a normal book, but she knew it was full of dangerous secrets. She picked up the diary and held it in her hands. She looked at the front cover, then the back cover. As she moved her thumb over the back, she felt something strange. The back cover felt a bit thick and hard in one spot. She turned the book over and looked closely. There was a piece of thick, clear tape on the inside of the back cover. The tape was old and a little yellow. Under the tape, there was a small, flat object. Elena's heart jumped. She used her fingernails to pull at the edge of the tape. It was very sticky, but she pulled it slowly. A small key fell onto the wooden table. Elena stared at it. The key was not a normal silver or gold color. It was a bright, beautiful blue. It was very small and had a round top. It looked like a key for a diary, a jewelry box, or a very small desk drawer. A blue key. Elena whispered, "What do you open?" She picked up the key. It was cold in her hand. She looked around her apartment. She looked at the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom closet, and the windows. She did not see anything with a blue lock. Then, she looked at the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room. The desk was part of the apartment. It was there when she moved in. It was dark wood and had many small drawers. Elena went back to the diary. She turned the pages quickly, looking for the word key. She found an entry from late March. The handwriting was very messy. March 28th. I have the key now. It is the only way to see the truth. I will hide it where they will not look. They want the papers, but they need the key first. If you have the key, you have the proof. Elena felt a heavy weight in her chest. This little blue key was important. David had hidden it because he was afraid someone would steal it. He wanted someone to find it, but only someone who was careful. She put the key into her pocket. She felt its cold shape against her leg. It was getting dark outside now. The street lights turned on, and shadows grew long in the empty rooms. Elena did not turn on her lamps. She sat in the dark and thought about David. She felt like she was part of his story now. She was not just a girl in a new apartment. She was a detective. She had to find the lock for the blue key. The night was very dark. Elena lay on her mattress, but her eyes were open. The blue key was on the floor next to her lamp. Every time she looked at it, she felt a little bit of hope and a little bit of fear. The apartment building was old, and it made many sounds. The wind blew against the glass window. The pipes in the walls made a low, humming noise. Suddenly, Elena heard something different. It was a slow, heavy sound on the wooden floor in the hallway outside her door. It was not the sound of a small animal or the wind. It was the sound of a person walking. The person moved slowly, one step at a time. They stopped right in front of apartment 4B. Elena's heart began to beat very fast. She stayed very still. She did not want to make a sound. She listened. There was a long silence. Then, she heard a soft metal sound. It was the sound of a hand touching her door handle. The handle moved down very slowly, but the door was locked. The person outside was trying to come in. Elena got up from her mattress. She did not turn on the light. She walked across the cold floor on her tiptoes. She reached the front door and put her eye to the small peephole. The hallway was dark, but there was a small light near the stairs. Through the peephole, she saw a shadow. It was a very tall man. He was wearing a long, grey coat. His back was to her door. He was looking at the stairs, as if he was waiting for someone. He was very still. He did not move for a long time. Elena held her breath. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to scream, but she knew she must be quiet. The man turned his head a little bit. Elena could see the side of his face. He had a sharp nose and a very serious expression. He looked like he was searching for something. He put his hand in his pocket and took out a small piece of paper. He looked at the paper, then looked at Elena's door again. Elena stepped back from the door. She accidentally hit a small box with her foot. It made a quiet sound on the floor. She froze. Outside, the man became very still too. Elena waited for 10 seconds. Then, she looked through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. The man was gone. There was no sound of footsteps. There was no sound of a door closing. It was as if he had never been there. Elena sat on the floor with her back against the door. She did not move for an hour. She kept the blue key tight in her hand. The man in the grey coat was real. He was not just a story in David's diary. He was here, in her building, and he was looking for something in her apartment. She felt very small and very alone. She knew she could not stay in the apartment all day tomorrow. She needed to go out and find answers. The next morning, Elena felt very tired. She did not want to stay in her apartment. The walls felt too close. She put on her jacket and took her bag. She made sure the blue key and the red diary were safe at the bottom of her bag. She locked her door and walked down the stairs quickly. She did not see Mr. Miller or the man in the grey coat. The street was bright and busy. The sun was warm on her face. A few doors away from her building, there was a small cafe. It was called the Sunny Cup. The windows were clean, and there were small yellow flowers in pots outside. Elena went inside. The cafe was warm and smelled like fresh coffee and sweet bread. There were only a few people inside. Elena sat at a small table near the back. A young woman with a kind smile walked over to her. She was wearing a green apron. "Good morning," the waitress said. "What can I get for you?" "A coffee and a piece of toast, please," Elena said. She looked at the waitress's name tag. It said Mia. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" Mia asked. "I do not recognize your face." "Yes," Elena said. "I moved into the building next door yesterday. Apartment 4B. Mia stopped smiling for a second. She looked surprised. "Oh. Apartment 4B. That is a famous apartment in this cafe." Elena leaned forward. "Why is it famous?" Mia looked around to see if anyone was listening. She lowered her voice. "A man named David lived there for a year. He came here every morning. He always sat at that table in the corner. He was very quiet and very nice." "What happened to him?" Elena asked. Mia shook her head. "Nobody knows. One day, he came in for his coffee. He looked very scared. He kept looking at the door. He did not finish his drink. He stood up and ran out. That was 3 weeks ago. We never saw him again." Elena felt a knot in her stomach. Did he have any friends? Did anyone come looking for him? Only one man. Mia said. A man in a grey coat came here 2 days later. He asked about David. He wanted to know if David left anything behind. He was not a nice man. He had cold eyes. He made me feel very uncomfortable. Elena took a slow breath. Did David ever talk about his work? Or a man named Mr. Thorne? Mia frowned. He did not talk much. But he always had a big bag of papers with him. He spent hours writing in a little red book. And he was always looking at a map of the city. The waitress went to get Elena's coffee. Elena sat in silence. Now she knew the truth. David did not just move away. He did not say goodbye. He ran away because he was afraid. The man in the grey coat was looking for him. And now that man was looking at her door. Elena looked at the corner table where David used to sit. She felt a deep sadness for him. She also felt a new strength. She was not going to run away. She was going to find out what happened to David Miller. Elena finished her coffee and left the cafe. She felt a little stronger now. She had more information. But she also had more questions. She walked back to her building. She kept her head down and moved quickly. She did not want to see the man in the grey coat again. The street was busy. But she felt like everyone was watching her. She reached her apartment and locked the door behind her. The room was still and silent. She went to the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room. She had noticed it before, but she had not looked at it closely. The desk was very heavy. It was made of dark wood that was scratched and old. It looked like it had been in the apartment for many, many years. There were 3 drawers on the left side and 3 on the right. Elena opened the drawers on the left. They were empty and smelled like old paper. She opened the top 2 drawers on the right. They were also empty. But when she tried the bottom drawer on the right, it did not move. She pulled the handle again. It was stuck. She looked closely at the drawer. There was a small, round keyhole in the center. The wood around the hole was a little bit shiny, as if someone had touched it many times. Elena's heart began to beat faster. She reached into her bag and took out the blue key. It was the same bright color as the sky. She held it between her fingers. It felt cold and very important. This must be it. She whispered. She sat on the floor in front of the drawer. She looked at the blue key and then at the lock. She felt a little nervous. What if the key did not fit? What if the lock was broken? She thought about the man in the grey coat and the red diary. David had hidden this key for a reason. He wanted to protect whatever was inside this drawer. Elena put the key into the lock. It went in easily. It was a perfect fit. She took a deep breath. She did not turn it yet. She looked around the room. The apartment was quiet. But she felt like she was not alone. She felt the ghost of David's secret all around her. She put her hand on the key and started to turn it to the right. The lock was old, and it was a little bit difficult to turn. She used more strength. Suddenly, she felt the mechanism move inside the wood. The lock made a small, metallic sound as it opened. The drawer was now unlocked. Elena did not pull the drawer open immediately. She stayed on the floor for a moment. She was afraid of what she might find. Was it more bad news? Or was it the answer to everything? She put her hand on the handle. The wood felt rough. She slowly pulled the drawer toward her. It moved quietly. Inside, there was something white and flat. It was a large piece of paper, folded many times. Elena took the paper out of the drawer. Her hands were shaking a little bit. The paper was thick and old. It felt heavy in her fingers. She sat on the floor and unfolded it carefully. It was a large map of the whole city. The map showed every street, every building, and the long, blue river that went through the center of the town. Elena looked at the map closely. She saw 3 red circles. Someone had used a red pen to draw them very carefully. The circles were very clear against the white and grey paper. The first circle was over a park. It was a quiet park next to the river called Green Willow Park. The second circle was over the city library. The library was a very old, stone building in the middle of the city. The third circle was over the central train station. This was the biggest and busiest place in the city. Elena touched the red ink with her finger. The ink was dry. She wondered why David had marked these 3 places. Were they places where he felt safe? Or were they places where he hid something important? She thought about the diary. David wrote that he had to hide everything from Mr. Thorne. Maybe these 3 locations were part of his plan. She picked up the red diary and turned to the very last page. She found a short note that she had not seen before. It was written in very small letters at the bottom of the page. "If you are reading this, follow the circles," the note said. "The map will show you the way to the truth. But be careful. They are watching the locations. Do not let Thorne or the man in the grey coat find this map." Elena felt a cold wind from the window, even though it was closed. She was scared, but she was also very curious. She was the only person who had this map now. She had the blue key, the red diary, and the map with the red circles. She was part of David's secret. She felt like she was a character in a mystery book, but the danger was very real. She heard a soft sound in the hallway outside her door. She stopped moving and listened. Was someone there? She waited for a long time, but the sound did not come again. She felt like the walls of the apartment were watching her. She felt like the room was full of secrets that she did not understand yet. She folded the map again. She put it into the pocket of her jacket. She decided she would go to the first location tomorrow morning. She would go to the park by the river. Maybe she would find David there. Or maybe she would find another clue that David left for her. She looked at the blue key on the floor. It was a small key, but it had opened a very big mystery. She knew her life was changing. She was not just a woman moving into a new apartment anymore. She was a woman with a mission. She had to find the truth about the man who lived here before her. The night was very long and very dark. Elena did not want to sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table with a lamp. The map with the red circles was in front of her. She looked at the first circle. Green Willow Park. She thought about the park. It was a beautiful place, but now it felt like a place of secrets. Elena felt very small in the quiet apartment. She thought about David Miller. Was he still in the city? Was he watching her? Or was the man in the grey coat the only one watching? She looked at the red diary. The words inside were like a voice from the past. David was warning her, but she was already in the middle of the mystery. She decided to get some water. As she stood up, she heard a very soft sound near the front door. It was the sound of paper sliding across the floor. It was a very light, dry sound. Elena stopped moving. She did not breathe. She looked at the bottom of the front door. A small, white piece of paper was lying on the floor. It was folded in half. It had not been there a minute ago. Someone had pushed it under the door from the hallway. Elena ran to the door. She quickly turned the lock and pulled the door open. She looked into the hallway. The hallway was long and the lights were low. She saw the shadow of a person at the end of the hall, near the stairs. The person was moving fast. Then, she heard the heavy sound of the stair door closing. The person was gone. Elena did not follow them. It was too dangerous to run into the dark hallway at night. She stepped back into her apartment and closed the door. She locked it again and leaned her back against the wood. Her heart was beating fast. She picked up the small white paper from the floor. Her fingers were shaking. She unfolded the paper. There was no name on the note. There was no date. There were only 5 words written in large, black letters. The note said, "Do not look for him." Elena stared at the words. The ink was fresh and dark. The message was very clear. Someone knew that she was reading the diary. Someone knew that she was looking for David. This was not a friendly message. It was a warning. She thought about Mr. Miller on the 3rd floor. Was he the one who brought the note? Or was it the man in the grey coat? Elena felt a cold fear in her stomach. She felt like someone was standing right behind her, even though the room was empty. She went to the window and looked down at the street. It was empty. The city was asleep. But Elena was awake. She looked at the note again. She felt a mix of fear and anger. Someone was trying to scare her. Someone wanted her to stop. "But I will not stop," Elena whispered. She took the note and put it inside the red diary. She put the map, the key, and the diary into her bag. She went to her mattress and lay down. She kept her bag close to her. She was scared, but she was also determined. Tomorrow, she would go to Green Willow Park. She would find out what David was hiding. The warning did not stop her. It only made her more sure that the truth was important. The morning was very cold. Elena woke up before the sun was high in the sky. She did not want to stay in her bed. She felt like time was moving too fast. She dressed in warm clothes and put on her heavy coat. She took her bag and felt the weight of the red diary and the blue key. The map was in her pocket. She looked at her front door and remembered the note from the night before. "Do not look for him," it said. Elena took a deep breath. She opened the door and walked out. The hallway was empty. She moved down the stairs quietly. When she reached the 3rd floor, she looked at Mr. Miller's door. It was closed and silent. She wondered if he was awake. She wondered if he was the person who pushed the note under her door. She did not stop to knock. She went down to the street. The air outside was fresh. A light fog was over the city. Elena walked toward the river. The walk was long, but she did not want to take a bus. She wanted to see if anyone was following her. She turned her head many times. She saw a woman walking a dog. She saw a man selling newspapers. She did not see the man in the grey coat. Finally, she arrived at Green Willow Park. The park was very large. It had many tall trees with yellow and orange leaves. The river was on the left side of the park. The water was dark and moved quickly. It made a soft, rushing sound against the stone wall. Elena took the map out of her pocket. She looked at the first red circle. The circle was near the north side of the park. Elena walked along a small path. There were no other people in this part of the park. It was very quiet. She could only hear the sound of her own shoes on the dry leaves. She saw a large oak tree. It was the biggest tree in the area. Next to the tree, there was an old iron bench. The metal was black and looked very cold. Elena stopped. She looked at the map again. This was the place. The red circle was exactly here. She looked at the tree. She looked at the grass. She did not see anything special. She felt a little bit disappointed. Maybe I am wrong, she thought. Maybe there is nothing here. She sat down on the iron bench. The metal was freezing, and she felt the cold through her trousers. She looked at the river. Then, she looked down at the ground under the bench. The grass was a little bit different there. It was not as green as the rest of the park. It looked like someone had moved the dirt recently. Elena felt a spark of excitement. She knelt on the ground. She did not care about the dirt on her coat. She used her hands to touch the earth under the bench. The dirt was soft and loose. She began to move the dirt away with her fingers. Her heart started to beat faster. After a moment, her fingers touched something hard. It was not a rock. It felt like metal. She moved more dirt. A small, grey metal box appeared. It was about the size of a book. It was covered in mud, but it looked strong. Elena pulled the box out of the ground. She sat back on her heels and held the box in her hands. She looked around the park one more time. The trees were still. The fog was starting to go away. She was alone, but she felt like the eyes of the city were on her. Elena sat on the cold grass with a metal box in her lap. The box was dirty and heavy. She used her sleeve to wipe away the dark mud. The metal was grey and very strong. There was no keyhole on this box. Instead, there was a simple silver latch on the front. Elena looked at the latch. Her fingers were cold and red from the winter air. She felt a little bit of fear. What was inside? Was it something dangerous? She thought about David. He went to a lot of trouble to hide this box under the iron bench. He wanted to keep it safe from Mr. Thorne and the man in the grey coat. She took a deep breath. The air smelled like wet leaves and the river. She put her thumb on the latch and pushed it up. The box made a small, metallic sound as it opened. Elena lifted the lid. Inside the box, there was not a lot of money or a weapon. There was only one thing. It was a small, white business card. The card was inside a clear plastic bag to keep it dry. Elena took the bag out and opened it. She held the card between her fingers. The card was very simple. On the front, there was a drawing of an old clock with silver hands. Under the drawing, there were 3 words. The Silver Clock. Below the name, there was an address. 12, Maple Street. There was no phone number and no name. Elena turned the card over. On the back, someone had written a short message in blue ink. The handwriting was the same as the diary. It was David's writing. It said, "Ask for the time." Elena frowned. "Ask for the time," she whispered. It was a strange message. She looked at the address again. Maple Street was in the old part of the city. It was a place with many small shops and narrow streets. Suddenly, Elena felt a strange sensation. She felt like someone was looking at her back. She did not hear a voice, but the air felt different. She turned her head slowly. Behind her, the park was still full of fog. The tall oak trees looked like giant shadows. She saw a movement near a large bush about 20 meters away. A tall shape moved quickly behind a tree. Elena could not see the person's face, but she saw a long, grey coat. Her heart jumped. The man was here. He had followed her to the park. Elena did not wait. She put the business card into her pocket and put the metal box back into the hole under the bench. She pushed the dirt over it quickly with her hands. She stood up and began to walk fast. She did not run, because she did not want the man to know she was afraid. She walked toward the main path where there were more people. She saw a group of adults walking toward the river. She stayed close to them. She looked back once. The grey shadow was gone. The park was quiet again, but Elena knew the truth. She was not alone. The man in the grey coat was playing a game with her, and the next stop was 12, Maple Street. Elena walked quickly away from the park. She did not look back. She could feel the man in the grey coat behind her, even if she did not see him. She reached the main street and saw a blue bus. The bus was stopping to let people out. Elena did not wait. She jumped onto the bus and paid the driver. She sat in a seat near the back window. The bus was full of adults. There were men in suits and women with large bags. Everyone looked tired and busy. Elena looked out the window as the bus moved away. She saw the entrance of the park. For a second, she saw a tall man standing near the gate. He was wearing a grey coat. He was not moving. He was just watching the bus. Then, the bus turned a corner and he was gone. Elena took a deep breath. She felt a little safer now. She took the business card out of her pocket. She held it carefully. The card was white and very clean. The drawing of the silver clock was very detailed. The hands of the clock were pointing to 12 and 3. The silver clock, Elena whispered. 12, Maple Street. She turned the card over again. The words "Ask for the time" were written in dark blue ink. David's handwriting was very steady here. He was not rushed when he wrote this. This was a message for a friend. Or maybe it was a message for someone he trusted. Elena thought about the words. In a normal shop, you do not ask for the time. You look at your watch or your phone. If you ask for the time in a clock shop, it must be a secret code. Maybe the person in the shop would give her more information if she said those words. The bus stopped near a large library. Elena decided to get off. She needed a place to sit and think. She walked into the library. It was a very old building with high ceilings and thousands of books. It was very quiet. There were many adults sitting at tables, reading newspapers or working on computers. Elena found a small table in a dark corner. She put the card, the red diary, and the map on the table. She looked at the second red circle on her map. It was the city library. She was standing in the second location right now. David was here too, she thought. She looked at the bookshelves around her. This library was huge. How could she find one secret in a place with so many books? She looked at the diary again. She searched for the word library. She found a page from February. February 20th, the diary said. I spent the afternoon at the library. It is the only place where I feel like they are not watching me. I hid the second part of the truth in the history section. Look for the silver hands. Elena looked up at the signs on the walls. She saw a sign that said history. Her heart began to beat faster. The business card had a clock with silver hands. The diary mentioned silver hands too. Everything was connected. She stood up and walked toward the tall shelves of history books. She was tired, but she could not stop now. Every clue was a step closer to finding David. Elena walked through the history section of the library. The air was very dry and smelled like old paper. She looked at the high shelves. She saw many books about the city and its old buildings. She remembered the diary said to look for silver hands. She looked at the top of a shelf and saw a small, round clock. It was made of dark wood, and it had bright silver hands. She pulled a chair over and stood on it. Behind the clock, she found a small piece of paper. It was a newspaper clipping from 10 years ago. It showed a photo of a man standing in front of a shop. The shop was the Silver Clock. The man in the photo was smiling. The caption said his name was Mr. Gable. Elena put the paper in her bag. She knew she had to leave the library. The shop was the most important clue. She walked out of the library and found a taxi. She gave the driver the address. 12, Maple Street. The taxi moved through the narrow streets of the old town. The buildings here were very close together. Finally, the taxi stopped. Here you are, the driver said. Elena stepped onto the sidewalk. The street was very quiet. She saw a small shop with a large glass window. Above the door, there was a sign with the same silver clock drawing from the business card. Elena felt a mix of excitement and fear. She pushed the door open. The shop was full of clocks. There were tall grandfather clocks that stood against the walls. There were small gold clocks on the tables. Every clock was moving. The room was full of the sound of thousands of tiny mechanical movements. It sounded like a fast heart beating. An old man came out from a back room. He had white hair and wore small, round glasses. He was wearing a brown apron with many pockets. He looked at Elena with a kind but tired face. "Good afternoon," the man said. "I am Mr. Gable. Can I help you find a clock?" Elena looked at him. She thought about the message on the back of the business card. She took a deep breath. "I wanted to ask for the time," she said clearly. Mr. Gable stopped moving. He was holding a small tool, and he almost dropped it. His face changed from a smile to a look of deep worry. He looked at the front door and then back at Elena. He walked closer to her and spoke in a very low voice. "Who sent you?" he asked. "Was it David?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "I live in his old apartment. I found his diary and a blue key. I want to know where he is." Mr. Gable became very pale. He gripped the edge of a table. "David is a good friend. But he is in a lot of trouble. If you are here, that means the others are watching you too. You are in danger, young lady." He looked at her bag. "Did you bring the red book? You must be very careful. Mr. Thorne has people everywhere." Elena saw his hands shaking. Mr. Gable was not just a shop owner. He was a man who knew the dark truth about David's work. She wanted to ask more questions, but Mr. Gable suddenly looked at the window. His eyes went wide with fear. Mr. Gable moved very fast for an old man. He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her away from the front window. Outside, a dark car was parked across the street. A tall man was standing next to the car. He was wearing a long, grey coat. He was not looking at the clocks. He was looking directly at the shop door. "He is here," Mr. Gable whispered. His voice was full of fear. "The watchman is here. He follows everyone who looks for David." Elena felt cold. Her heart was beating fast. "What does he want?" she asked. "He wants the list," Mr. Gable said. "David found a list of names. It shows where the money goes. Mr. Thorne will do anything to get it back. You cannot leave through the front door." Mr. Gable led Elena to the back of the shop. They walked past a large grandfather clock. The mechanical parts of the clocks made a rhythmic sound that filled the room. He opened a small, heavy door at the back. "This leads to a narrow alley," Mr. Gable said. "Go to the end of the alley and turn right. There is a busy market there. You can hide in the crowd. Take this." He put a small piece of paper into Elena's hand. "This is a phone number for Julia. She was David's best friend. She is the only person who can help you now. Go. Now." Elena stepped out into the dark alley. The air was cold and smelled like wet stone. She heard the door close behind her. She did not look back. She began to walk quickly. The alley was dark, and the walls were high. She felt like the buildings were leaning over her. She reached the end of the alley and turned right. She was now on a street with many people. There were adults buying fruit and bread at the market. Elena felt a little bit safer in the crowd. She walked between the people, trying to move like everyone else. But then, she saw it. Across the street, the man in the grey coat was walking too. He was not running. He was moving at the same speed as Elena. Every time she turned a corner, he was there. He stayed 20 meters behind her. He was like a shadow that would not go away. Elena's hands were shaking. She reached into her pocket and felt the piece of paper with Julia's number. She needed to find a public phone. She could not go back to her apartment. The man in the grey coat knew where she lived. He knew her face. And now, he knew she had talked to Mr. Gable. She saw a small hotel at the corner. It had a bright lobby with many people. Elena ran toward the hotel. She hoped the man would not follow her inside. She needed to call Julia. She needed a plan. The mystery was no longer a game. It was a race, and the man in the grey coat was winning. The lobby of the Grand Hotel was very big and very bright. Large lamps hung from the ceiling, and the floor was made of shining gold stone. Many adults were sitting in comfortable chairs, reading the news or talking in low voices. Elena walked quickly toward a small desk in the corner where there was a black telephone. She felt her heart beating in her throat. She looked at the glass doors of the hotel. The man in the grey coat was standing on the sidewalk, but he did not come inside. Elena took the small piece of paper from her pocket. The number was written in messy pencil. She picked up the phone and dialed the numbers one by one. Her hand was shaking so much that she almost dropped the phone. The telephone made a long, steady sound while she waited. Finally, a woman answered. "Hello," the voice said. The woman sounded tired and very nervous. "Is this Julia?" Elena asked. She spoke softly so the other people in the lobby could not hear her. There was a long silence on the other end. "Who is this?" the woman asked. Her voice was sharp now. "How did you get this number?" "My name is Elena. I live in David Miller's old apartment," Elena said quickly. "Mr. Gable gave me your number. I found the red diary and the blue key. I know David is in trouble." She heard a sharp breath. "The diary," Julia whispered. "You have it. Is it safe?" "Yes," Elena said. "But a man in a grey coat is following me. I am at the Grand Hotel right now. I don't know what to do." "Listen to me carefully," Julia said. Her voice was now calm and serious. "The man in the grey coat is dangerous. He works for Mr. Thorne. You must not go home. We need to meet. But it must be a secret. Do you have the map?" "Yes," Elena answered. "I saw the red circles." "Go to the second circle," Julia said. "The city library. There is a large room on the third floor for old books. It is very quiet there. I will meet you in 1 hour. Do not talk to anyone. If you see the man, do not run. Just move into a crowd." "How will I know you?" Elena asked. "I will have a yellow book in my hand," Julia said. "Now, go. Be very careful, Elena." The phone made a short noise as the call ended. Elena put the phone down. She felt a little better because she was not alone anymore. But she still had to get to the library. She looked at the front door. The man in the grey coat was still there. He was lighting a cigarette and looking at his watch. Elena did not go to the front door. She saw a waiter carrying a tray of food toward a door near the kitchen. She followed him quietly. The door led to a small hallway for the workers. She walked past boxes of vegetables and clean towels. She found a heavy metal door at the back of the hotel. She pushed it open and stepped into a quiet street. The man in the grey coat was still at the front of the building. Elena began to walk fast toward the center of the city. The library was not far, and the truth was waiting for her there. Elena reached the city library 10 minutes early. The building was made of heavy, grey stone. It looked like a castle in the middle of the city. There were large statues of lions near the front doors. Elena walked up the wide stone steps. Her legs felt heavy because she was tired and afraid. She looked behind her one last time. The street was busy, but she did not see the grey coat. She went inside. The library was very quiet. The air was cool and smelled like old books and floor wax. Elena did not stop at the main desk. She followed the signs to the stairs. She climbed to the second floor, and then to the third floor. This floor was much darker than the others. There were fewer lights and many rows of tall wooden shelves. She found the room for old books. It was a small room with large windows that looked out over the city roofs. There was a long wooden table in the center of the room. 2 men were sitting at the far end of the room, reading old newspapers. Elena sat at the table and waited. She kept her bag on her lap. She felt the blue key and the diary through the fabric. 5 minutes passed. Then, the door opened slowly. A woman walked into the room. She was about 30 years old. She had short brown hair and wore a green jacket. In her right hand, she held a bright yellow book. Elena felt a wave of relief. This was Julia. Julia looked around the room. She saw Elena and walked over to the table. She sat down in the chair next to Elena. She looked very tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were moving nervously. "Are you Elena?" Julia asked. Her voice was just a whisper. "Yes." Elena said, "Thank you for coming." Julia looked at the two men at the end of the room. She moved closer to Elena. "We must be very quick. Mr. Thorne has many people in the city. They are looking for that diary. David told me he hid it in his apartment, but he did not tell me where. I found it behind a cabinet." Elena said, "And I found a map with 3 circles. This library is the second circle. Why did David mark this place?" Julia took a deep breath. David worked with many papers. He found out that Mr. Thorne was stealing money from the city. David was a good man, so he took the evidence. He knew he could not keep the papers in one place. He split the evidence into 3 parts. He hid the first part in the park. The second part is here, in this library. "Where is it?" Elena asked. She looked at the thousands of books on the shelves. David loved history. Julia said, "He told me that if anything happened to him, I should look for a book about the history of the silver clock shop. He said the book was a gift from an old friend." Elena remembered the shop owner, Mr. Gable. "I visited the shop today," she said. "Mr. Gable was very afraid." "He has a reason to be afraid," Julia said. "Now, stay here. I will look for the book in the history section. If we find the second part of the evidence, we can go to the police together." Julia stood up and began to walk toward the shelves. Elena watched her. She felt like they were very close to the truth, but she also felt a strange sensation of being watched. She looked at the door of the room. It was closed, but she saw a shadow move in the small window of the door. Someone was standing in the hallway. Elena stood up slowly. She did not want Julia to see her fear. She looked at the door again. The shadow was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. The library felt very cold now. Julia was already at the back of the room. She was looking at a row of large, green books. Elena walked over to her. "Did you find it?" Elena asked. Her voice was very quiet. Julia shook her head. Her face was pale in the dim light. "Not yet. It should be here. The history of the local businesses is kept in this corner. David told me the book has a dark blue cover with silver letters. It is called The History of the Silver Clock." Elena helped her look. They moved their fingers along the backs of the books. They saw books about the city river, the old schools, and the famous bakeries. Finally, Elena found the right shelf. There was a sign that said local business. She looked at the books. She saw a book about a shoe shop and a book about an old hotel. But between the 2 books, there was an empty space. "It is not here," Elena said. She felt a cold sensation in her chest. Julia looked at the empty space. She touched the shelf with her hand. "No, this is impossible." David was very careful. He said no one would look for a history book. If the book is gone, then someone else knows about the second circle. Elena thought about the shadow at the door. "Julia, I saw someone looking through the window of the door a minute ago. I think we are not alone in this room." Julia turned around quickly. She looked at the two men at the end of the room. They were still reading their newspapers, but one man was now looking at his watch. He stood up and put his newspaper on the table. He was a tall man, but he was not wearing a grey coat. He was wearing a dark suit. He walked toward the exit without looking at them. "We have to ask the librarian," Elena suggested. "Maybe someone took the book to a different table." They walked out of the room and found a desk near the stairs. An older woman with grey hair was sitting there. She was typing on a computer. "Excuse me," Julia said. "We are looking for a book called The History of the Silver Clock. It is missing from the shelf." The librarian looked at her computer screen. She typed for a moment and then frowned. "That is strange. According to the computer, that book was checked out 2 hours ago." "Who checked it out?" Elena asked. The librarian shook her head. "I cannot give you the name of the person. It is against the rules. But I can tell you that it was a man. He was very tall and very polite." Elena and Julia looked at each other. They both knew who the man was. The man in the grey coat was ahead of them. He had the second part of the evidence. "We are too late," Julia whispered. She looked like she wanted to cry. "If he has the book, he has the papers. Thorn will destroy them, and David will never be safe. We still have the third circle," Elena said. She felt a new spark of energy. She was not ready to give up. "The train station. We have to go there before he does." Elena and Julia walked away from the library. The wind was stronger now, and it moved the dry leaves across the sidewalk. The sun was going down, and the shadows of the buildings grew long and thin. Elena felt a heavy weight in her heart. They were losing. The man in the grey coat was always one step ahead. "We need to sit down," Julia said. Her face was pale, and she looked very tired. "I have something else to show you. I was afraid to show you before, but now I must." They found a small, quiet park with a few wooden benches. There were no children playing, only a few adults walking home from work. They sat under a large tree. Julia opened her green bag and took out a thin blue folder. Inside the folder, there were several papers and an old photograph. "David sent me this folder 2 days before he disappeared," Julia explained. "He told me to keep it safe. It is a list of the people who worked in his department at Thorn Financial. There is also a photo from the company holiday party last year." Elena took the photograph. It was a bright photo of a group of people standing in a large office. They were all smiling and holding glasses of juice. She saw David in the middle. He looked happy and relaxed. He was standing next to a tall man with grey hair. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She looked closer at the man next to David. He was wearing a dark suit and a silver tie. He had a very familiar face. It was Mr. Miller, her neighbor from apartment 3A. "Julia," Elena whispered. "I know this man. This is Mr. Miller. He lives in my building, 1 floor below me." Julia looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "David told me that his neighbor was a stranger. He said he didn't know anyone in the building." "I spoke to him," Elena said. Her voice was full of anger. "He told me he didn't know David well. He said the apartment was empty for a long time. He told me to stop looking for the truth. He lied to me." Elena looked at the list of names in the folder. She searched for the letter M. She found it near the bottom. Arthur Miller, Senior Supervisor. He wasn't just a worker, Elena said. He was David's supervisor. He was his boss's right-hand man. He watched David every day at the office, and then he watched him every night at home. This means Mr. Thorn put him there, Julia said. She looked at the street nervously. Mr. Miller is not just a grumpy neighbor. He is a spy. He is probably reporting everything you do to Mr. Thorne. Elena felt a cold shiver. She thought about her apartment. She thought about the blue key and the red diary. Was Mr. Miller listening through the floor? Did he know she was with Julia right now? The building that felt like a home now felt like a trap. He pushed that note under my door. Elena realized. The note that said, "Do not look for him." He wanted to protect his secret. He wanted me to be afraid so I would leave the building. "We cannot go back to the apartment," Julia said. "It is too dangerous. But we have to go to the third circle on the map. The train station is our last chance to find the final piece of evidence." Elena nodded. She felt a new sense of determination. Mr. Miller had lied to her face, but she was not going to let him win. She stood up and put the photo back in the folder. The truth was hiding at the central train station, and she was ready to find it. Elena and Julia stood up from the park bench. The sky was now dark blue, and the city lights were starting to glow. Julia looked at Elena with worried eyes. "Do not go back to your apartment," Julia said again. "Mr. Miller is watching. It is not safe." "I know," Elena said. "But I remembered something from the diary. David wrote about a low place where the air is heavy. I think he meant the basement of the building. He might have hidden something there before he left for the train station." Julia shook her head. "It is too dangerous. Let me go with you." "No," Elena replied. "If Mr. Miller sees two of us, he will know something is wrong. I will go in through the back door. You stay here and watch the street. If you see the man in the gray coat, call my phone." Elena walked back toward her apartment building. She did not walk on the main street. She used the small alleys behind the shops. She reached the back of her building. There was a small, heavy metal door that was used for trash. It was old and the paint was falling off. Elena used a small tool to turn the lock. The door opened. Inside, it was very dark. The air was cold and smelled like wet stone and old metal. Elena took a small flashlight from her bag. The light was bright and moved across the walls. She saw many pipes on the ceiling. They were long and looked like snakes in the dark. Water was dripping from one pipe, making a steady, rhythmic sound on the floor. She was in the basement. It was a very large room with many small wooden cages. These cages were used by the people in the building to keep their old boxes and bicycles. Elena walked slowly. Her shoes made a soft sound on the gray concrete floor. She looked at the numbers on the cages. She passed cage 1A, 2B, and 3A. Finally, she saw a cage with the number 4B. This was the space for her apartment. The wooden door of the cage was closed with a large, heavy lock. Elena looked at the lock. It was silver and very strong. She did not have a key for this. She felt a sudden wave of fear. The basement was very quiet, but she felt like she was not alone. She turned her flashlight to the left. She saw large shadows behind the wooden walls. Then, she heard a sound. It was the sound of a heavy door closing at the top of the stairs. Someone had just entered the basement. Elena turned off her flashlight quickly. The darkness was now complete. She moved behind a large pile of old tires and stayed very still. Her heart was beating so loud that she thought the other person could hear it. She heard footsteps. They were slow and heavy. The person was walking toward the back of the basement, right where Elena was hiding. She held her breath. A light appeared at the end of the hallway. It was a small, yellow light from another flashlight. The light moved across the cages. It stopped on cage 4B. Elena watched from behind the tires. She saw a pair of black shoes and the bottom of a blue sweater. It was Mr. Miller. He was standing in front of her cage, and he was holding a set of keys. Elena stayed behind the tires. She did not move. Her hands were cold. She watched Mr. Miller. He was standing in front of her cage. He looked left and right. He seemed very worried. He took a heavy key from his pocket. He put the key into the lock. The metal made a sharp sound as it opened. Mr. Miller stepped into the cage. Elena heard him moving things. She heard the sound of heavy boxes sliding on the concrete floor. He was breathing loudly. He moved a bicycle and some old chairs. After a few minutes, he stopped. He looked angry. He did not find what he was looking for. "Where is it?" he whispered. His voice was low and rough. He walked out of the cage. He was in a hurry. He closed the wooden door and pushed the lock. But he was moving too fast. The lock did not click. It stayed open by a small distance. Mr. Miller turned off his flashlight and walked to the stairs. Elena heard the heavy door at the top of the stairs close. A loud noise echoed through the dark basement. Then, everything was silent. Elena waited. She counted to 60 very slowly. She wanted to be sure he was gone. Then, she stood up. Her legs felt stiff. She walked to cage 4B. She reached out and pulled the silver lock. It fell into her hand. She opened the wooden door and stepped inside. The cage smelled like dust and old blankets. Elena turned on her flashlight. The light was a bright circle on the floor. She moved a stack of old newspapers. She moved a box of kitchen plates. In the far corner, under a dirty grey blanket, she saw something. She pulled the blanket away. It was a wooden trunk. The trunk was made of dark brown wood. It had strong metal edges. It looked very heavy. Elena saw a small piece of metal on the lid. She moved her light closer. The metal had a name on it. It said, David Miller. Elena felt her heart jump. This was David's secret place. She put her hands on the lid. The wood felt rough and cold. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside the trunk, there were many things. She saw a pair of old boots. She saw a thick wool sweater. She moved the clothes to the side. At the bottom of the trunk, there was a small black bag. The bag was made of plastic to protect it from the damp air. Elena picked up the bag. It was light. She opened the plastic. Inside, there was a small digital camera. It was old and the screen was cracked. Next to the camera, there was a tiny black memory card. Elena held the card in her hand. She knew this was important. This was what Mr. Miller was looking for. This was the evidence David wanted to keep safe. She put the card into her pocket and closed the trunk. She had to leave before Mr. Miller came back. Elena sat on the floor of the small cage. She held the small black camera in her hands. The plastic was cold. She saw a large crack across the glass screen. It looked like someone had dropped it or stepped on it. She found the power button on the top. She pushed it with her thumb. She waited for a light or a sound. But nothing happened. The camera remained dark and silent. "It is broken," she whispered. She looked at the tiny memory card in her other hand. It was no bigger than her fingernail. She knew the camera was just a shell. The real secrets were inside this tiny piece of plastic. She reached into her bag and found a small plastic case. She put the memory card inside and tucked it safely into the deepest pocket of her jacket. She stood up and looked around the cage one last time. She did not want to leave any signs that she was there. She pulled the grey blanket back over the wooden trunk. She moved the old newspapers and the box of plates back to their original places. She stepped out of the cage and pulled the wooden door shut. She put the heavy silver lock back on the door. It looked exactly like it did when Mr. Miller left. Suddenly, Elena heard a noise from above. It was the sound of a heavy door opening at the top of the stairs. Then, She heard voices. There were two people talking. One voice was deep and rough. She recognized it immediately. It was Mr. Miller. The other voice was cold and very calm. "Are you sure it is not here, Miller?" the cold voice asked. "I looked everywhere in the cage," Mr. Miller said. He sounded very nervous. "I moved every box. The trunk is empty. Maybe David took the card with him. Mr. Thorne will not be happy with this news," the cold voice replied. "He pays you to watch this building. If the girl finds that card before we do, you will have a very big problem." Elena felt a wave of cold fear. The man with the cold voice was likely the man in the grey coat. They were both standing just a few meters above her. She looked at the back door of the basement. It was her only way out. She turned off her flashlight. The darkness was thick like a heavy blanket. She began to move toward the back door. She moved very slowly. She did not want her shoes to make a sound on the concrete. She felt the wall with her left hand to guide her. She heard the footsteps of the two men on the wooden stairs. They were coming down into the basement again. "Check the other cages," the cold voice ordered. Maybe he hid it in a neighbor's space. Elena reached the metal door. She felt the handle. It was cold and heavy. She turned it very slowly. The metal made a tiny, sharp sound. She stopped and waited. The men were talking loudly now, so they did not hear her. She pushed the door open just enough to slip outside. The night air hit her face. It was freezing, but it felt wonderful. She closed the door quietly and ran into the shadows of the alley. She had to find a computer. She had to see what was on that memory card. Elena stood very still in the dark alley. The air was cold, but she was sweating because she was so nervous. She looked at the heavy metal door. It was closed now. Inside, Mr. Miller and the man with the cold voice were still looking for the memory card. Elena felt the small card in her pocket. It felt like a piece of hot coal against her leg. She knew she had to get away from the building immediately. She began to walk toward the end of the alley. The walls were high and made of dark brick. There were no lights here. Suddenly, she stopped. She heard a noise behind her. It was not the metal door. It was the sound of a window opening above her. She looked up. A yellow light came from a window on the first floor. A man was leaning out of the window. He was looking down into the alley. Elena moved quickly behind a large green trash bin. She held her breath. The man stayed at the window for a long time. He was looking right at the spot where she was standing a moment ago. "Is someone there?" the man asked. His voice was loud and angry. Elena did not move. She stayed very close to the wall. The trash bin smelled bad, but it was a good hiding place. After a minute, the man closed the window and turned off the light. The alley was dark again. Elena waited. She was about to move when she saw something else. Near the metal door of the basement, a shadow was moving. It was a person, but it was not Mr. Miller or the man in the grey coat. This person was smaller and moved very quickly. The person was wearing a dark jacket and a hat. They were looking at the ground, as if they were searching for something Elena had dropped. Elena felt a new wave of fear. How many people were looking for David's secret? She watched the shadow. The person walked to the metal door and tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside now. The shadow stood there for a moment, then turned and walked toward the other end of the alley, the same direction Elena needed to go. "I cannot go that way," Elena thought. She looked for another exit. There was a small gap between two buildings on her left. It was very narrow, but she was a thin woman. She squeezed her body into the gap. The brick walls were rough and scratched her coat. She moved slowly, one step at a time. The space was so small that she could feel the cold stone on her chest and her back. Finally, she reached the other side. She was now on a different street. This street had more lights and a few cars. She did not see the shadow or the men from the basement. She saw a small internet cafe across the street. It was open. I can check the card there, she said to herself. She walked toward the cafe, but she kept her head down. She felt like 1,000 eyes were watching her from the dark windows of the tall buildings. She reached the door of the cafe and went inside. The warmth of the room felt good, but she did not relax. She knew the man in the grey coat and Mr. Miller were still close. She had to be fast. She had to see what David had hidden on that tiny card. Elena walked to the back of the internet cafe. There were many computers in a long row. Some adults were playing games on the screens. Others were typing long emails. Elena found a computer in a dark corner. She sat down and turned on the screen. The light from the monitor was very bright in the dark room. She felt the tiny memory card in her pocket. Her heart was beating fast. She put the card into the side of the computer very carefully. A small window appeared on the screen. It said, "New folder found." Elena clicked the folder with the mouse. There was only one file inside. It was a photograph. Elena opened the photo. It was a picture of a small, yellow piece of paper. The paper was a receipt from a locker. It had big black numbers on it. 502. At the bottom of the paper, it said, "Central Train Station." Elena took the map out of her pocket. She unfolded it on the desk. She looked at the third red circle. It was exactly over the Central Train Station. Now she understood David's plan. David hid the final piece of evidence in a locker at the station. This was the final part of the puzzle. The first clue was in the park, the second was in the library, and the last was in locker 502. She closed the folder and took the memory card out of the computer. She did not want to leave any traces of her work. She deleted the history on the computer and turned off the screen. She stood up and walked to the door. The air outside was much colder now. The streetlights were bright, and the sidewalk was wet from a light rain. Elena looked around the street. She did not see the man in the grey coat. She did not see Mr. Miller. But she knew they were not far away. They wanted the papers. They wanted the truth. Elena walked toward the subway entrance. She needed to get to the Central Train Station as fast as possible. The train station was a very big building. It was in the center of the city. Thousands of people went there every day. It was a good place to hide something because it was always busy and full of strangers. Elena reached the subway station. She bought a ticket and waited for the train. The platform was full of adults. Some were carrying large suitcases. Others were reading books or looking at their phones. Elena felt the blue key in her bag. She wondered if the blue key would open the locker. Or maybe there was another key hidden at the station. She thought about Julia. She hoped Julia was safe in the park. She looked at her phone. There were no messages and no missed calls. The train arrived with a heavy movement of air and a bright light. Elena got on the train. She sat near the door. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. She looked tired, but her eyes were determined. She was not a simple woman moving into a new apartment anymore. She was a woman with a secret mission. She was going to find the truth for David. She was going to the third circle. The Central Train Station was a giant world made of glass and steel. Elena stepped off the subway and into the main hall. The ceiling was so high that it looked like a sky of metal. Hundreds of adults were moving in every direction. Some were running to catch their trains. Others were standing still, looking at the giant digital boards that showed the times of the departures and arrivals. The air was full of voices and the heavy smell of coffee. Elena felt very small in the middle of the crowd. She kept her hand on her bag, where the blue key and the memory card were hidden. She looked at the signs on the walls. She saw a sign with a picture of a small key. It pointed toward a long hallway behind the ticket desks. Elena followed the sign. The hallway for the lockers was much quieter than the main hall. The floor was made of grey tiles, and the walls were covered with thousands of small metal doors. Each door had a number. Elena walked past the 100s, the 200s, and the 300s. Her heart began to beat faster as she reached the 500s. She looked at the numbers on the right side of the hallway. 500, 501, and finally, 502. Locker 502 was at the bottom of the row. The metal door was scratched and old. Elena stood in front of it for a moment. She looked behind her. There was a man sitting on a bench at the end of the hall, but he was reading a book. He did not look like the man in the grey coat. She was alone for now. She reached into her bag and took out the blue key. She looked at the bright blue metal. She remembered finding it behind the diary in her kitchen. This was the moment David had planned for. She knelt on the cold tile floor and put the key into the lock of locker 502. The key turned easily. There was no resistance. Elena heard the internal mechanism move. She pulled the small handle, and the door opened with a light scrape against the metal frame. The locker was dark inside. Elena used her hand to feel the space. Her fingers touched something cold and smooth. It was a thick plastic envelope. She pulled the envelope out. It was heavy. Through the plastic, she could see many papers and a small, dark object. She did not open it here. It was too dangerous to show the contents in a public place. She pushed the locker door shut and stood up. She put the envelope into her bag. As she turned to leave, she saw a shadow on the floor. A person was standing at the entrance of the locker hallway. The person was tall and was wearing a long, grey coat. The man had found her. He was not moving. He was just standing there, blocking the only way out. Elena's heart dropped. She looked for another exit, but there were only the rows of lockers and the cold stone walls. Elena stood frozen against the cold metal lockers. The man in the grey coat began to walk toward her. His footsteps were slow and heavy, echoing against the stone walls. As he moved into the light, Elena finally saw his face clearly. He was not old, but his face was hard, with a sharp jaw and eyes as cold as the river. This was the man who had been a shadow in her life for the last 48 hours. "Give me the envelope, Elena," the man said. His voice was calm, which made it even more terrifying. "You have no idea what you are holding. It does not belong to you. It belongs to David," Elena said, her voice trembling but loud. She gripped her bag tighter. "It is the truth about Mr. Thorne." The man stopped a few meters away. He did not look angry. He looked bored, like he was doing a simple job. "David is gone. He was smart, but he was not fast enough. You are making the same mistake. You think you can change the world with a few pieces of paper, but the world belongs to men like Thorne." Elena looked behind him. The hallway was a dead end in one direction, but she noticed a small service door behind a trash bin to her left. It was probably for the cleaning staff. She had to move fast. "Where is David?" Elena asked, trying to keep him talking. The man in the grey coat took a step closer. "He is safe, for now. But his safety depends on that envelope. If you give it to me, maybe you will see him again. If you don't, well, the city is a very dangerous place for a young woman alone." Suddenly, the loud sound of a train whistle echoed through the hallway from the platforms above. The floor vibrated. Elena saw her chance. She reached into her bag, not for the envelope, but for the heavy silver lock she had taken from the basement. With all her strength, she threw the lock at the light bulb above the man's head. The bulb shattered, and the hallway plunged into darkness. The man shouted, a sound of surprise and rage. Elena did not wait. She dropped to the floor and crawled toward the left wall. She felt the rough edge of the service door. She pulled the handle. It was unlocked. She slipped through the door and found herself in a narrow, dimly lit staircase that led upward. She ran. Her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. But she did not stop. She could hear the man behind her, his heavy boots hitting the metal stairs. She reached the top of the stairs and pushed open another door. She was suddenly back in the main hall of the station, surrounded by hundreds of people. The bright lights and the noise of the crowd felt like a shield. She did not look back. She pushed through the groups of travelers, moving toward the main exit. She needed to find Julia. She needed to find a place where the man in the gray coat could not follow. Elena burst through the heavy glass doors of the station and into the cold night air. The rain was falling harder now, turning the city lights into blurry smears of yellow and red. She didn't stop to look for a bus. She ran to the edge of the sidewalk and waved her hand wildly until a yellow taxi pulled over. "Drive." She gasped as she scrambled into the back seat. "Just drive toward the river." The driver, an older man with a flat cap, looked at her in the mirror. "Are you all right, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine." Elena lied, her chest heaving. "Please, just go." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Elena looked out the back window. The man in the gray coat had emerged from the station. He stood on the steps, his coat flapping in the wind, watching the sea of yellow cars. He didn't chase after them. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Elena turned away and slid down into the seat. She pulled the plastic envelope from her bag. Her hands were still shaking. She tore the top open. Inside, there was a stack of bank statements, several legal documents with the Thorn Financial logo, and a small, silver USB drive. But what caught her eye was a handwritten letter clipped to the front. "To whoever finds this. My name is David Miller. If you have this envelope, it means I am either in hiding or I am gone. These documents prove that Arthur Thorn has been using city pension funds to cover his own debts. Mr. Miller, my supervisor, was his enforcer. They are dangerous. Do not go to the police yet. Thorn has friends there. Take this to the press. Take it to the light." Elena felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain. She looked at the bank statements. The numbers were enormous. Millions of dollars moved into private accounts in the name of Thorn Holdings. She realized now that she wasn't just holding a diary or a key. She was holding the end of Arthur Thorn's empire. No wonder the man in the gray coat was so desperate. "I have it." She whispered to the empty car. "I have the truth." She took out her phone and dialed Julia's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Elena." Julia's voice was frantic. "Where are you?" "I saw the gray coat at the park entrance. I had to hide." "I have the envelope." "Julia," Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm in a taxi. We need to go to the city newspaper office. It's the only place they won't dare to follow us. Meet me at the fountain in the North Square." Julia said, "It's only 2 blocks from the news building. Hurry." "Elena, I think they know where I am." The call ended. Elena looked at the USB drive in her palm. The final battle was about to begin, and the North Square was the only thing standing between her and the end of this nightmare. The taxi pulled up to the edge of North Square. The rain was now a steady downpour, turning the cobblestone streets into a shimmering black mirror. Elena paid the driver and stepped out, immediately pulling her collar up against the wind. The square was large and mostly empty, dominated by a massive stone fountain in the center. The water from the fountain splashed into the basin, joining the sound of the rain. Elena walked toward the fountain, her eyes darting between the shadows of the surrounding buildings. The city newspaper office, a tall glass tower with a glowing red sign, was only 2 blocks away. It looked like a lighthouse in a storm. "Julia!" she called out, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. From behind a large stone pillar near the base of the fountain, a figure emerged. It was Julia. She was soaked to the bone, her green jacket clinging to her shoulders. She looked exhausted, but when she saw Elena, a flash of hope crossed her face. "You made it," Julia said, grabbing Elena's arm. "Do you have it?" Elena patted her bag. "Everything. The bank statements, the USB, David's letter. It's all here." "We have to move," Julia urged, glancing back at the entrance to the square. "I saw a black car circling the block twice. They're closing the perimeter. They know this is the only place left for us to go." As they began to hurry across the open square toward the news building, a pair of bright headlights cut through the darkness. A black sedan sped around the corner and halted, blocking their path to the main street. The doors opened, and 2 men stepped out. Neither was the man in the grey coat. These men were younger, wearing dark tactical jackets. "Stop right there," one of them shouted. "Run," Julia cried. They turned and bolted toward a narrow side street that led toward the back of the newspaper building. Elena's boots slipped on the wet stones, but she kept her balance. Behind them, she heard the heavy thud of footsteps. "Target is moving toward the service entrance. Intercept now." The voice came from a speaker somewhere nearby. They were being hunted with professional precision. Elena realized that Thorne wasn't just sending a lone watchman anymore. He had sent a team. They reached the side street, but a second car was already idling at the far end. They were trapped in the alley. Elena looked up. There was a metal fire escape hanging just above their heads. "Up there," Elena pointed. "It's the only way." Julia grabbed the bottom rung and pulled it down. They scrambled up the wet iron stairs just as the men reached the mouth of the alley. Below them, the men looked up, their faces illuminated by the harsh streetlights. "They're on the fire escape." Elena didn't look back. She climbed higher, the cold metal biting into her hands. They were 5 stories up when they reached a window that was slightly cracked open. It was an office on the side of the newspaper building. Elena pushed the window up and tumbled inside, pulling Julia in after her. They were in a dark, quiet office. The only sound was the hum of a computer and the distant sirens of the city. Elena leaned against the wall, clutching the envelope to her chest. They were inside the building, but they weren't safe yet. They had to find someone who would listen. The office was vast and filled with rows of empty desks. In the dim light, the computer monitors looked like glowing ghosts. Elena and Julia moved quietly, their wet shoes squeaking on the carpet. They followed a sign that pointed toward the editorial department. "We need to find Sarah Jenkins," Julia whispered, her voice trembling. "David mentioned her in one of his letters. She's the only one he trusted to handle the Thorne story." They reached a glass-walled office at the end of the hall. On the door, a nameplate read, "Sarah Jenkins, Investigative Editor." Elena pushed the door open. The room was empty, but a coffee mug on the desk was still warm. "She must be here somewhere," Elena said. Suddenly, the lights in the main newsroom flickered and turned on. The hum of the building changed. Elena looked at a security monitor sitting on the corner of Sarah's desk. Her heart stopped. The camera in the lobby showed 3 men entering the building. Leading them was the man in the grey coat. He wasn't running. He was walking with a terrifying, calm purpose. He held a gold badge up to the security guard, who immediately stepped aside. "They're inside," Elena gasped, pointing at the screen. "They have someone on the inside. That badge, they're pretending to be police." "We don't have time to find Sarah," Julia said, her eyes wide with panic. "If they catch us with the envelope, It's over. Elena looked at the computer on the desk. It was logged in. We'll send it ourselves. We'll send it to every news outlet in the country. She fumbled with the USB drive, her fingers slick with rain. She plugged it into the computer. A window popped up, showing dozens of audio files and scanned documents. The contents included Thorne discussing the pension reallocation, the secret ledger of stolen funds, and direct orders from Thorne to silence David. Elena opened the email application. She began typing in the addresses for the city's major newspapers and TV stations. The elevator is moving, Julia warned, watching the monitor. It's stopping on our floor. Just a few more seconds. Elena muttered. She hit attach and selected all the files. A loading bar appeared on the screen. The bar moved slowly. The chime of the elevator echoed through the quiet hallway outside. The heavy footsteps began, slow, rhythmic, and closing in. Elena, he's here. Julia ducked behind a filing cabinet. The loading bar hit 98%. Elena's hand hovered over the send button. The door to the editorial wing swung open. The man in the grey coat stood in the doorway, his silhouette long and sharp against the bright hallway lights. He didn't pull a weapon. He simply held out his hand. Last chance. Elena. He said. Shut it down. Too late. Elena whispered. The bar hit 100%. With a defiant click, she pressed send. The screen flashed. Message sent successfully. The man's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He stepped into the room, but before he could reach the desk, the main lights of the office flashed 3 times, and a loud, authoritative voice boomed from the doorway behind him. Step away from the desk. The man in the grey coat froze. Standing in the doorway was Sarah Jenkins, a sharp-eyed woman with a camera slung over her shoulder, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a dark suit holding a gold shield. Detective Vance, Sarah said, pointing at the man in the grey coat. That's the man who's been harassing my sources. And the woman at the computer just sent us enough evidence to put Arthur Thorne away for a lifetime. The man in the grey coat looked at the computer screen, then at the officers. For the first time, the cold mask on his face cracked. He realized the game was over. The evidence wasn't just in an envelope anymore. It was in the inbox of every major news editor in the city. He went quietly, the click of handcuffs echoing through the silent newsroom. Julia came out from behind the filing cabinet, tears streaming down her face. Elena stood up, her legs shaking so hard she had to lean on the desk. Is it over? Julia whispered. It's over. Sarah Jenkins said, walking toward them. I saw the email alerts on my phone. You two are incredibly brave. Because of you, Thorne Financial is going to collapse by tomorrow morning. And Mr. Miller. The police already have a warrant for his arrest. They're picking him up at the apartment building right now. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Elena and Julia stayed in a safe house provided by the newspaper while the story broke. The headline of the City Gazette was the largest the city had seen in decades. But one question remained. Where was David? On the 3rd day, the police found him. He hadn't been captured. Using the final clue at the central train station, David had boarded a quiet midnight train to a small cabin owned by his grandfather in the mountains. He had been waiting for the news to break, knowing it was the only signal that it was safe to return. When Elena finally met him at the station, he looked thin and tired, but his eyes were bright with gratitude. He took her hand and looked at the blue key she still carried. You found it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't think anyone would be brave enough to follow the circles all the way to the end. I just wanted to know the truth. Elena replied. Elena returned to apartment 4B a week later. The building was quiet now. Mr. Miller was gone, and a new, friendly family had moved into the third floor. She sat at the old wooden desk in the corner of her living room. The sun was shining through the windows, casting long, warm beams across the floor. The red diary was back on her shelf, but it was no longer a book of secrets. It was a reminder that even in a city full of shadows, one person with a key and the courage to use it can bring everything into the light. Elena picked up her pen and opened a new, blank notebook. She didn't write about secrets or lies. She wrote the first line of her own story. It was a beautiful morning in apartment 4B. The weeks following the trial of Arthur Thorne were the quietest Elena had ever known. The headlines had moved on to other scandals, and the reporters who once camped outside apartment 4B had found new stories to chase. For Elena, life had settled into a comfortable, if slightly lonely, rhythm. She spent her mornings at the Sunny Cup with Mia, and her afternoons working as a freelance researcher, a job Sarah Jenkins had helped her secure. David had moved into a small house on the edge of the city. They saw each other often, usually for dinner or long walks through Green Willow Park. They spoke about everything except the past. It was as if they both agreed that the red diary and the blue key were artifacts of a life they no longer lived. However, the feeling of safety was a fragile glass, and it was about to shatter. It happened on a Tuesday evening. A light snow was falling, dusting the window sills of the old building. Elena was making tea when she heard a knock at her door. It wasn't the frantic, heavy knock of the man in the grey coat, nor the soft, rhythmic knock David used. It was 3 sharp, precise taps. Elena went to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway. She was elegant, wearing a black wool coat and a silk scarf. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, professional bun. She looked more like a lawyer than a threat, but Elena's instincts, sharpened by her ordeal, immediately went on high alert. "Who is it?" Elena asked, keeping the chain lock engaged. "My name is Beatrice Vane." The woman replied. Her voice was melodic and perfectly calm. "I am a representative of the Obsidian Group. I believe you have something that belongs to our board of directors." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know what you're talking about. Arthur Thorne is in prison. Whatever he had is with the police." Beatrice smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. Arthur Thorne was a middle manager with a taste for greed. He was a small man playing a large game. The documents you gave to the press were incomplete. There was a secondary encryption on that USB drive. Elena. One that your friend Sarah Jenkins was unable to crack. We would like it back. The police have the drive," Elena said, her hand tightening on the door handle. "The police have a copy." Beatrice corrected her. "We know David Miller kept the original. And we know he visited you last night. We would prefer to handle this quietly, without the drama of the previous months. The Obsidian Group doesn't like drama. Elena. It likes efficiency." Beatrice reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, white envelope. She slid it under the door. "Think of this as a gesture of goodwill. Inside is a ticket. If you and Mr. Miller are not at the station tomorrow morning, the efficiency I mentioned will become very personal." The woman turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. Elena waited until the sound faded before picking up the envelope. Inside was a single train ticket to Zurich, Switzerland, and a note written in elegant calligraphy. "The truth has a deeper basement than you imagined." Elena didn't wait for morning. She grabbed her coat and ran down the stairs, her breath hitching in the cold night air. She drove to David's house, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for black sedans or men in grey coats. The city felt different now. Every shadow was a potential observer, every street lamp a spotlight. When she arrived, David was in his study, surrounded by books. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to worry the moment he saw her face. Without a word, She handed him the white envelope and the note from Beatrice Vane. David read the note twice. He ran a hand through his hair, a habit he had when he was deeply stressed. Obsidian. He whispered. I heard the name once in Thorne's office. He was terrified of them. I thought they were just a myth, a ghost story the executives told to keep everyone in line. She said there was a second encryption. Elena said, sitting on the edge of a chair. On the original USB drive. David, did you keep it? David hesitated, then walked over to a bookshelf. He pulled down a thick medical dictionary and opened a hollowed-out section in the back. There, nestled in velvet, was the silver USB drive Elena had found in the train station locker. I couldn't give the original to the police. David admitted. Something told me that if I did, it would disappear into a file cabinet and never be seen again. I gave Sarah a bit-for-bit copy, but I kept this. I tried to look into the deeper folders, but the encryption is military grade. It requires a physical key to unlock, a dongle of some kind. The blue key? Elena asked. No. David said, shaking his head. The blue key was for the drawer. This requires something digital. Something Beatrice Vane thinks we have. He plugged the drive into his laptop. A screen appeared, but instead of the folders of bank statements they had seen before, a single, pulsing red lock icon sat in the center of a black background. Below it, a text box waited for a code. If we go to Zurich. Elena said. We're walking right into their hands. If we don't go. David countered. They'll come here. And as Beatrice said, they are efficient. Thorne was an amateur compared to a global syndicate. If they want this drive, they'll tear this city apart to find it. Elena looked at the red lock on the screen. She realized that their victory over Thorne had been a single step in a much longer journey. The truth David had mentioned in his letter was only the surface. We need a specialist. Elena decided. Someone who knows how to fight ghosts. I know one person. David said. A man who worked for Thorne but hated him. A technician who went into hiding months ago. He's the one who told me about the Obsidian group. If anyone knows how to open this drive without the efficiency of Beatrice Vane, it's him. Where is he? David looked at the train ticket on the table. He's not in Zurich. He's in London. We're going to have to change our travel plans. Elena. And we're going to have to do it without being seen. The decision to divert to London was a dangerous gamble. David knew that Beatrice Vane would be monitoring the Zurich trains, her efficiency waiting at the other end of the line. To escape the city, they needed a ghost route. David led Elena to a small, private airfield on the outskirts of town, where a pilot who owed him a favor from his years at Thorne Financial waited with a twin-engine prop plane. As they ascended into the grey morning sky, the city looked like a miniature circuit board below them. Elena clutched her bag, the silver USB drive feeling like a lead weight inside. She looked at David, who was staring out the window with a haunted expression. Who is this technician? David. She asked over the roar of the engines. And why would he help us? His name is Julian Vesper. David said, his voice strained. He was the architect of Thorne's digital security. He didn't build it because he was evil. He built it because he was a genius who needed the money for his sister's medical bills. When he realized Thorne was using his code to facilitate the Obsidian Group's money laundering, he tried to quit. Thorne threatened his family. Julian went underground shortly after I took the diary. The flight was long and tense. They landed at a small, private strip in Kent and took a series of local trains into the heart of London. The city was a chaotic blend of the ancient and the ultramodern. They moved through the crowds at King's Cross, blending in with the thousands of commuters. David led her to a narrow, forgotten street in Shoreditch, where the buildings were covered in vibrant street art and the smell of roasting coffee filled the air. They stopped in front of an unassuming shop that sold vintage electronics. The window was filled with gutted radios, vacuum tubes, and old television sets. David knocked on the door in a specific pattern. A small camera above the door rotated to face them. A few seconds later, the lock clicked. Inside, the shop was a labyrinth of wires and hardware. A young man with messy hair and thick glasses looked up from a workbench. He looked as though he hadn't slept in a week. "David," the man said, his voice raspy. "I told you never to come here. You're a walking target." "I have it, Julian," David said, stepping into the dim light of the workshop. "The original drive. The Obsidian Group sent a representative to Elena's apartment. They know we have the primary encryption." Julian's face went pale. He stood up and locked the shop door. "Beatrice Vane. If she's involved, you're already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. Let me see it." Elena handed him the silver drive. Julian plugged it into a custom-built machine that looked like a cross between a supercomputer and a toaster. The red lock icon appeared on the screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This isn't just encryption," Julian muttered, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. "This is a dead man's switch. If I try to brute force the password, it will wipe the drive and send a GPS ping to the Obsidian servers. To open this, we need the hardware token." "Where is it?" Elena asked. Julian looked at them with a grim smile. "It's not a thing you can find in a locker. It's a biological key. It's encoded into the retina of a high-level executive. And the nearest one isn't in London or Zurich. He's in Paris." The news that they needed a biological key hit Elena like a physical blow. She had spent weeks dealing with physical keys and digital codes, but the idea of needing a person's eye to unlock the truth was a new level of darkness. Julian explained that the Obsidian Group used a biometric layering system for their most sensitive files, the Grand Ledger that contained the identities of their global partners. "The man you need is Marcus Thorne," Julian said, his eyes fixed on the pulsing red lock. "Arthur's older brother. He's the real power in the family. He runs the European division of Obsidian from a penthouse in the 8th arrondissement. He's vain, he's dangerous, and he's obsessed with his own security. How are we supposed to get close enough to scan his eye?" David asked, pacing the small workshop. "We can't exactly ask him for a photo." Julian reached into a drawer and pulled out a device that looked like a pair of high-end sunglasses. "This is a high-resolution retinal capture device. It's disguised as a pair of shades. If you can get Marcus to look directly at you from within 3 feet for at least 5 seconds, these will capture the pattern and store it on a microchip." "And how do we get within 3 feet of a billionaire in a guarded penthouse?" Elena asked. "There's a gala," Julian replied, pulling up a digital invitation on his screen. "The Obsidian Foundation's annual charity event at the Musée d'Orsay. Marcus will be there. He loves the spotlight. You'll need to infiltrate the event, get the scan, and get out before his security realizes who you are." "I don't have a gown for a Parisian gala," Elena said, a dry sense of humor bubbling up through her fear. "We'll handle the wardrobe," Julian said seriously. "But you need to understand the stakes. If you fail, Obsidian won't just kill you. They'll erase you. Your bank accounts, your records, your identity, everything will vanish. You'll become ghosts in the system." They spent the next 12 hours in a fever of preparation. Julian forged digital identities for them. Elena became a wealthy art consultant from New York, and David was her silent partner. He taught them the basics of the shades, how to activate the scanner with a blink and how to ensure the image was clear. As they prepared to board the Eurostar to Paris, the weight of the mission settled over them. They were no longer just looking for the truth about a local pension fund. They were going after the architects of a global shadow economy. Elena, David said as they waited on the platform at St. Pancras. You don't have to do this. You could stay here. Julian can hide you. Elena looked at the reflections of the travelers in the glass. People living normal lives, unaware of the war being fought in the shadows. She thought about Mr. Miller's lies and the man in the grey coat. I've come this far, David, she said, her voice steady. I want to see what's behind that red lock. I want to see the face of the people who think they own us. The train began to move, carrying them toward the lights of Paris and the dangerous eyes of Marcus Thorne. The Eurostar arrived at Gare du Nord in a flurry of steam and noise. Paris was cold, the air tasting of rain and expensive perfume. Elena felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. Where London felt like a gritty gears and wires workshop, Paris felt like a polished stage. Everything was beautiful, but every beauty felt like a mask for something sharper underneath. They checked into a small, discreet hotel in the Latin Quarter, far from the grand boulevards where Marcus Thorne likely spent his time. Julian had provided them with a generous operating budget, funds he had siphoned from a Thorne shell company months ago. It felt like poetic justice to use the syndicate's own money to fund their downfall. We have 6 hours, David said, checking his watch. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes deeper than they had been in London. On the bed lay the equipment Julian had arranged for them, a shimmering midnight blue gown for Elena and a perfectly tailored tuxedo for David. Beside them sat the shades, their frames matte black and unremarkable. Elena picked up the dress. It was heavy with sequins that looked like stars in a night sky. Do you think we can actually pull this off, David? We're just 2 people from a quiet apartment building. We aren't spies. We weren't detectives either, David reminded her, coming to stand by the window. But you found the key. You found the map. You have a way of seeing things others miss. That's why we're here. He turned to her, his expression softening. Marcus Thorne is used to being the most dangerous person in the room. He expects threats from rivals or the government. He won't expect a threat from someone he considers ordinary. That is our only advantage. Elena spent the afternoon practicing with the retinal scanner. Julian had explained the mechanics. A double blink of the left eye would activate the infrared laser, and a steady gaze for 5 seconds would complete the capture. She stood in front of the hotel mirror, staring at her own reflection, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The tiny green LED on the inside of the frame flashed twice. Success. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Parisian sky in strokes of violet and gold, they prepared for the event. Elena transformed. With her hair swept up and the dark gown hugging her frame, she looked like the wealthy art consultant Julian had invented. David, in his tuxedo, looked like a man who had never known a day of fear in his life. They took a sleek black car to the Musée d'Orsay. The museum, a former railway station, was illuminated by thousands of floodlights, its giant clocks glowing like beacons. A long red carpet stretched from the street to the entrance, flanked by photographers and security guards with earpieces. Remember, David whispered as the car door was opened by a gloved attendant. Stay close. Don't look for the scan until he's distracted. If we get separated, meet at the second clock on the upper gallery. Elena stepped out into the flashing lights. Her heart was a drum in her chest, but her face was a mask of cool indifference. She was no longer Elena from apartment 4B. She was the predator now. Inside, the museum was breathtaking. The great nave, where trains once hissed and steamed, was now a cathedral of art and wealth. The impressionist masterpieces on the walls seemed to watch the guests with painted eyes. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of crystal flutes, and a string quartet played a haunting Vivaldi melody that echoed off the high glass vaulted ceiling. Elena scanned the room through her darkened lenses. The display inside the glasses highlighted faces, cross-referencing them with Julian's database. Most were low priority: politicians, celebrities, minor business moguls. Then, a pulse of red light appeared in the corner of her vision. Target identified. A tiny voice whispered in her ear. Marcus Thorne stood near the center of the hall, beneath the massive golden clock. He was older than Arthur, with silver hair swept back and a face that looked like it had been carved from marble. He exuded an aura of absolute power. Surrounding him was a phalanx of guards, their eyes constantly moving, their hands never far from their jackets. "He's well protected," David murmured, standing beside her with a glass of champagne he didn't drink. "We need a diversion. Something to pull the guards away so you can get into his personal space." "I have an idea," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the target. "The auction. Look at the schedule." A large digital board announced the upcoming secret auction of a rediscovered Degas sketch. The auction was to take place in a more intimate gallery upstairs. Marcus was a known collector. He wouldn't miss the chance to flex his financial muscles in front of his peers. They moved to the upper level, positioned near the entrance of the private gallery. As Marcus approached, the crowd thinned. David took a deep breath. "I'll draw the lead guard. He knows me from the office records. If he sees me, he'll think I'm here for a confrontation. He'll move to intercept. That's your window." "David, no. That's too risky," Elena whispered. But he was already moving. David stepped into the light, intentionally catching the eye of the head of security. The guard's expression shifted instantly to one of recognition and alarm. He gestured to two other men, and they converged on David, leading him toward a side exit for questioning. The distraction worked. Marcus, annoyed by the interruption but not feeling personally threatened, continued toward the gallery. He was alone for a split second, adjusting his cufflinks. Elena stepped into his path, feigning a stumble. She reached out, and Marcus, ever the gentleman in public, caught her by the elbows. "Careful, mademoiselle," he said, his voice a rich, oily baritone. She looked up, staring directly into his piercing blue eyes. Her left eye blinked twice. "1." Marcus smiled, a predatory, shark-like expression. "2. Are you enjoying the evening?" he asked. 3. It's a bit overwhelming," Elena replied, her voice steady. 4. He leaned in closer, his gaze narrowing. 5. The green LED inside her frame flashed. The scan was complete. "Thank you, monsieur," Elena said, gently disengaging. "I'm quite fine now." She turned and walked away into the crowd, her hands trembling. She had the key, but as she looked back, she saw the security guards returning to the floor. David was not with them. The adrenaline that had sustained Elena during the encounter with Marcus Thorne evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp panic. She moved through the glittering crowd of the Musée d'Orsay, her eyes darting between the marble statues and the long shadows cast by the vaulted ceiling. She reached the second clock on the upper gallery, the designated meeting point, but the space was empty. The giant gold-rimmed clock face ticked forward with a heavy, mechanical finality. "David," she whispered into her earpiece. There was only static. The bone conduction headset, which had been her lifeline to Julian Vesper in London, remained silent. She looked down over the railing at the main hall. The gala continued as if nothing had happened. Men in tuxedos laughed over champagne. Women in silk gowns gestured at impressionist paintings. But near the side exit, she saw the 3 security guards who had intercepted David. They were straightening their jackets, their faces grim and professional. David was nowhere to be seen. Elena knew she couldn't stay. If the guards had recognized David, It was only a matter of minutes before they reviewed the security footage and identified her as his accomplice. She moved toward the back of the museum, using the service stairs Julian had mapped out for her. Every creak of the metal steps sounded like a gunshot in the quiet stairwell. She reached the street level, exiting through a heavy door into a side alley. The Parisian rain was back, a fine mist that chilled her to the bone. She ran toward the Latin Quarter, her heels clicking rhythmically on the wet cobblestones until she reached the safety of a crowded boulevard. She ducked into a small, brightly lit pharmacy, bought a pair of cheap sneakers and a hooded sweatshirt, and changed in the cramped bathroom. She stuffed the midnight blue gown into a trash bin outside, shedding the persona of the art consultant like a dead skin. Back at their small hotel, the room felt cavernous and terrifying without David. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she pulled the shades from her bag. She connected them to Julian's encrypted laptop. "Julian," she said as the connection light flickered to life. "David's been taken. Marcus Thorne's security intercepted him at the gala." Julian's face appeared on the screen, looking even more haggard than before. "Damn it. They won't kill him yet. Elena. Marcus is a tactician. He'll want to know who David is working with and how much you know. But we have to move. Did you get the scan?" "I got it," Elena said, her voice cracking. "But what good is it if David is in their hands? The only leverage you have to save him is the information on that drive." Julian said sternly, "If we can unlock the Grand Ledger, we can threaten to broadcast the identities of every Obsidian partner globally. It's the only thing Marcus fears more than death, the exposure of his shadow government. Upload the data. Elena. Now." Elena clicked the transfer button. The retinal scan, the biological key to the world's most dangerous secrets, began to upload. The upload bar on Julian's laptop moved with agonizing slowness. Elena paced the small hotel room, her mind racing. She thought about the red diary, the blue key, and the small apartment building where this had all started. It seemed impossible that a simple search for a missing neighbor had led to a high-stakes digital war in the heart of Paris. Almost there. Julian's voice crackled through the speakers. "The biometric hash is being processed, combinations, but the retinal pattern reduces the entropy to near zero. It's working. Elena. The red lock is breaking." On the screen, the pulsing red lock icon that had haunted them since London suddenly shattered into 1,000 digital shards. A new directory appeared, titled L'Almanach des Ombres, the Almanac of Shadows. Elena leaned in, her eyes widening. This wasn't just a list of bank transfers. It was a global map of influence. "It's more than money," Elena whispered. "They own the infrastructure of half the world. Look at the Watchman file," Julian urged. "That's their private army. The man in the grey coat. He's just one of hundreds. They use them to destabilize markets and silence whistleblowers. David was just a footnote in their operations until he took that diary." Elena scrolled down to a subfolder labeled Current Intercepts. She clicked it, her heart stopping as she saw a fresh entry. Subject 702. David Miller. Location: the Chateau de Vincennes. The Chateau de Vincennes? Elena asked. "That's an old fortress on the edge of the city." "It's a historical site," Julian said, his fingers flying across his keyboard in London. "But the lower levels, the old dungeons, are leased to a private security firm under the Obsidian umbrella. That's where they've taken him. Marcus doesn't just want the drive. He wants to make an example of David." "How much time do we have?" "Marcus is hosting a private dinner for the board members tomorrow night," Julian said. "He'll want David to confess his collaborators before the night is over. Once he has the names, David becomes a liability. Then we have 24 hours to break into a fortress." Elena said, a strange, cold calm settling over her. "Julian, you said this drive contains the identities of their partners. Can you ghost the signals? Can you make it look like the information is already leaking? I can set up a dead man's pulse." Julian replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "Every hour, a single high-profile name from the ledger gets leaked to a different international news agency. If Marcus doesn't release David and surrender, the whole house of cards falls." "Do it," Elena said. "And tell me how to get into that chateau." The Chateau de Vincennes was a massive medieval fortress, a square of thick stone walls and deep moats standing on the eastern edge of Paris. In the moonlight, its high towers looked like jagged teeth biting into the sky. While tourists visited the royal apartments during the day, the deeper sections, the donjon and the subterranean levels, remained cold, dark, and strictly off-limits. Elena stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of the park floral. She wore a dark utility jacket and tactical trousers she had purchased from an army surplus store. In her ear, Julian's voice was a steady hum of technical data. The Obsidian Group uses the 14th century basement for their server clusters and interrogation rooms. Julian explained. "It's perfect for them. The stone walls are 10 feet thick, which means zero signal leakage. They've installed a modern security layer, laser grids and biometric scanners." "How do I get in?" Elena asked, adjusting the straps of her backpack. "The moat," Julian replied. "It's dry on the southern side. There's an old drainage grate that connects to the modern HVAC system. I've overridden the sensor for that specific vent. You have a 5-minute window before the system runs a self-diagnostic and notices the bypass." Elena didn't hesitate. She climbed over the outer stone wall and dropped into the dry moat. The air was damp and smelled of ancient earth. She found the grate, a heavy iron square. Using a motorized bolt cutter Julian had instructed her to buy, she snapped the rusted locks and slid inside. The crawl space was narrow and hot, filled with the hum of giant fans. Elena pushed through, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached a secondary grate that looked down into a brightly lit hallway. Below, 2 guards in the same tactical jackets she had seen in the North Square were patrolling. They were armed with submachine guns. "I see the guards," she whispered. "Wait for the shift change," Julian said. "In 30 seconds, they'll move to the North Hub. When they do, drop down. The room at the end of the hall is the security substation. You need to plug the ghost box I gave you into their local network." The guards turned the corner. Elena kicked out the grate and dropped silently to the floor. She ran to the substation, a small room filled with monitors. She fumbled with the ghost box, a small black device with a single flashing blue light, and jammed it into an open Ethernet port. "Link established," Julian said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I'm in. I'm shutting down the cameras in the lower corridor. Elena, go now." David is in the room marked Archives at the bottom of the spiral stairs. Elena ran. The stone walls flew past her, the history of the fortress blurring with the high-tech sensors of the modern syndicate. She reached the stairs and descended into the cold, damp dark. The basement was silent except for the rhythmic dripping of water and the distant hum of servers. Elena reached a heavy steel door with a digital keypad. Before she could ask, the lock clicked open. Julian's work. She pushed the door open. The room was cold, lit only by a single hanging bulb. David was there, tied to a wooden chair. His face was bruised, and his shirt was torn. But when he looked up and saw Elena, his eyes cleared with a spark of pure shock. "Elena," he croaked. "You have to leave. It's a trap." "I'm not leaving without you," she said, rushing to his side and pulling a small knife from her belt to cut his ropes. "I'm afraid he's right. Elena," a voice said from the shadows. Beatrice Vane stepped into the light. She looked as elegant as she had in the hallway of apartment 4B, but she was holding a silenced pistol. Behind her, the man in the grey coat, the one who was supposed to be in high security lockup, stepped forward. The Obsidian Group has many friends in the police department, Beatrice said, her voice smooth and cold. Did you really think a set of handcuffs could hold our best efficiency expert? The man in the grey coat smiled. It was a thin, cruel expression. I told you, Elena, the world belongs to us. The world belongs to whoever controls the information. Elena countered, standing her ground in front of David. She held up her phone. Julian, are we live? Live and broadcasting. Julian's voice boomed from the room's intercom system, echoing off the stone walls. The first names from the Grand Ledger are hitting the wire now. The Minister of Finance in Paris, the CEO of the World Bank, and your own board of directors. Beatrice. Their private accounts are being drained and donated to the city pension funds as we speak. Beatrice's composure finally broke. Her hand shook as she tightened her grip on the gun. Shut it down. Tell him to stop. I can't. Elena said. It's a dead man's pulse. If I don't check in every 10 minutes with a specific code, the entire database goes public. Every crime, every murder, every stolen dollar. You can kill us, but you'll be doing it in the middle of a global collapse you can't survive. The man in the grey coat looked at Beatrice, his professional mask flickering with doubt. For the first time, the hunters looked like the prey. The code. Elena. Beatrice hissed. Give me the code. The code is David's release. Elena said. And our safe passage to the American Embassy. You have 1 minute before the next name, the chairman of the Obsidian Group, goes live. The silence in the dungeon was heavy. The ancient stones of the Chateau de Vincennes seemed to wait for the decision of the modern world. Beatrice looked at the timer, then at the man in the grey coat. The power they had built over decades was being undone by a researcher from apartment 4B and a technician in a London junk shop. Untie him. Beatrice commanded. The man in the grey coat stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Elena. With a sharp flick of his blade, he sliced through David's remaining bonds. David slumped forward, but Elena caught him, pulling his arm over her shoulder. His weight was heavy, but her adrenaline provided a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed. The timer is still counting, Beatrice. Elena reminded her, gesturing to the phone. 50 seconds until Marcus Thorne's name is synonymous with global terrorism. Beatrice Vane's jaw was tight, her eyes burning with a cold fury. Go! But understand this, Elena, the digital world is a playground, but the physical world still has teeth. You might leak our names, but you have to survive long enough to watch the fallout. Elena didn't wait for a second invitation. She steered David toward the heavy steel door. They moved through the subterranean corridors of the chateau, the air growing colder as they ascended toward the surface. Behind them, the sounds of shouting echoed as Beatrice likely scrambled to find a way to jam the signal. Julian. Elena whispered into her earpiece. We're out of the cell. Is the ghost box still active? Still active. Julian's voice crackled. But the Obsidian Group is counterattacking. They're trying to flood the local cell towers to block your phone's outgoing signal. You need to get to high ground or a hardline connection. The embassy is 10 kilometers away. I've hailed an automated car to the north gate. It's a hacked rental, no GPS tracking. They emerged from the castle's dark interior into the chilly night air of the outer courtyard. The fortress looked different now, less like a prison and more like an obstacle course. Elena could see the flash of flashlights near the main gate. The guards were mobilizing. This way. David managed to say, his voice stronger now. He led her toward the western wall, where a series of old scaffolding platforms were set up for masonry repairs. They climbed the wooden planks, the structure groaning under their weight. Below them, a black sedan tore across the gravel, its headlights cutting through the dark like searchlights. Elena looked at her phone. 20 seconds. We're not going to make it to the gate. Elena realized. She looked at the moat. It was a 30-foot drop into the dry, grassy ditch. David, we have to jump. You first. David said, his face pale but determined. Elena didn't think. She leaped. The wind rushed past her ears, and she hit the soft earth. A second later, David landed beside her. They scrambled up the opposite bank of the moat and ran toward the street just as the timer hit 0. A notification flashed on Elena's screen. Phase 1 leak. Successful. Somewhere in the city, the first domino had fallen. But as they reached the curb, the hacked rental car slid to a halt, and behind it, 2 black Obsidian SUVs turned the corner, their sirens silent but their intent clear. The rental car door swung open automatically. Elena shoved David into the back seat and dived in after him. Drive. Go to the US Embassy. The car's electric motor accelerated, the tires on the Parisian pavement. Julian had programmed the vehicle to ignore speed limits and traffic signals. They tore through the streets of the 12th arrondissement, weaving through late-night traffic. Behind them, the Obsidian SUVs were gaining ground, their drivers skilled in high-speed pursuit. Julian, they're on us. Elena shouted over the wind rushing through the partially open window. I see them on the traffic cams. Julian replied. I'm changing the light sequences. Hang on. 2 blocks ahead, the traffic lights turned red for the cross-traffic and green for Elena's car. The Obsidian SUVs were forced to swerve around a heavy delivery truck that had entered the intersection. The gap widened, but only for a moment. David, look in the glove box. Elena commanded. Julian said he left a gift. David reached in and pulled out a small, heavy cylinder with a pull ring. It's a signal jammer, he said, reading the label. A short-range EMP. It'll fry the electronics of any car within 20 meters, including ours. Then we only use it when we're close enough to the embassy gates to coast in. Elena said. The chase moved into the heart of Paris, passing the Place de la Bastille and moving toward the Seine. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance, a mocking symbol of the City of Light, while they fought in the shadows. The lead Obsidian SUV pulled alongside them, the window rolling down to reveal the man in the grey coat. He raised a weapon. Now! Elena screamed. David pulled the ring on the EMP device. A silent, invisible pulse rippled outward. Immediately, the rental car's dashboard went dark. The engine died, and the power steering locked up. But the effect on the Obsidian SUV was more dramatic. Its computer system suffered a total failure. The vehicle veered sharply to the right, smashing into a row of parked bicycles and flipping onto its side. Elena's car, now a 3-ton sled of dead metal, was still moving at 80 kilometers per hour. They were hurtling toward the Place de la Concorde. The gates. David pointed. The US Embassy sat behind a formidable perimeter of steel bollards and armed Marine guards. Elena's car was coasting directly toward the main entrance. The guards raised their rifles, shouting orders to stop. We're seeking asylum. Elena yelled out the window, waving the silver USB drive. We have the Obsidian Ledger. The car slowed, the friction of the road finally winning the battle against momentum. It came to a stop just inches from the security bollards. The Marine guards surrounded the vehicle, their faces stern. A side door of the embassy opened, and a woman in a sharp suit stepped out. Not Beatrice Vane, but someone with a different kind of authority. My name is Elena, Elena said, stepping out of the car with her hands raised. And I think the world is waiting for what's on this drive. The man in the grey coat watched from the shadows of a nearby building as the Marines ushered Elena and David inside. He touched his earpiece. "They're in," he whispered. "But the ledger is only the beginning. Tell Marcus to activate the redacted protocol." The interior of the US Embassy was a stark contrast to the medieval dampness of the Chateau de Vincennes. It was a world of brushed steel, fluorescent lights, and the hum of air filtration systems. Elena and David were led into a windowless briefing room. A Marine stood by the door, his face an unreadable mask of duty. "You're safe here," the woman in the suit said. She introduced herself as Special Agent Miller, no relation to David. She sat across from them, her eyes fixed on the silver USB drive resting on the table between them. But safe is a relative term when you've just set fire to the global financial system. Elena leaned forward, her hair matted with rain and her coat torn. The Obsidian Group isn't just a financial system. They're a shadow government. They've been stealing pension funds, manipulating elections, and using watchmen to murder anyone who gets in their way. Julian Vesper, our technician, is currently leaking the ledger to every news agency on the planet. Agent Miller tapped a stylus against her tablet. "We know. The State Department is already receiving frantic calls from 3 different world leaders whose names appeared in the Phase 1 leak 10 minutes ago. But there's a problem, Elena. The redacted protocol." "What is that?" David asked, his voice still raspy from his time in the dungeon. "Look at the monitors," Agent Miller said, gesturing to a screen on the wall. The digital map of the Obsidian Ledger, which Julian had been broadcasting, was changing. The names weren't disappearing. They were being replaced. Where there had been Marcus Thorne or Jadeite Logistics, there was now a string of gibberish. "They're using a poison pill algorithm." A voice crackled over the intercom. It was Julian, patched in via secure embassy line. "They knew I'd try to leak the ledger, so they built a secondary script. It's rewriting the data in real time, replacing real names with the names of innocent people, journalists, activists, and low-level government employees. They're turning the evidence into a weapon of mass confusion." Elena felt a surge of nausea. If the public sees innocent names mixed in with the criminals, the whole leak loses its credibility. No one will know who to trust. "Exactly," Julian said. "And the redacted protocol does one more thing. It's encrypting the GPS locations of their primary server hubs. If we don't stop the rewrite in the next 2 hours, the original data will be overwritten forever, and we'll be left with a ledger full of lies." "Where is the master override?" Elena asked. "It's not in Paris," Julian replied. "And it's not in London. The protocol is being broadcast from a satellite uplink in a very specific, very private location. The Thorne estate in the Swiss Alps. That's the heart of the machine." The American embassy couldn't officially invade Swiss territory, but they could provide transportation for witnesses of international importance. 2 hours later, Elena and David were strapped into the back of a blacked-out transport plane, soaring over the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Alps. The plan was desperate. Julian had identified the source of the redacted protocol, a high-altitude server farm buried beneath the Thorne family's private chateau near St. Moritz. Because the facility was shielded against remote hacking, the only way to stop the poison pill was to physically insert a countervirus into the main terminal. "You don't have to do this, Elena," David said, his hand finding hers in the dim light of the cargo hold. "Agent Miller's team can handle the physical breach. They don't know the system like I do," Elena said, looking at the tablet Julian had prepared for her. "I've spent weeks inside their logic. I know how they hide their folders. Besides, Beatrice Vane knows Agent Miller's faces. She doesn't expect me to come to her front door." The plane leveled off. A jumpmaster signaled them. They weren't parachuting. They were taking a tactical helicopter for the final leg, a low-altitude insertion into the valley below the chateau. The chateau was a fortress of glass and wood, perched on a cliffside like a predatory bird. As the helicopter hovered inches above the deep snow, Elena and David stepped out, followed by a small team of elite tactical specialists. The cold was immediate and violent, the wind whipping ice crystals against their goggles. Thermal signatures detected in the north wing. The team leader whispered into his comms. "The watchmen are out in force. They know we're coming. They don't know why." Elena replied. She held the small black device Julian had built, the antidote. "They think we're here to arrest Marcus. They don't realize we're here to kill the signal." They moved through the snow, ghosts in white camouflage. Elena felt the weight of the silver USB drive in her pocket. The original drive. The one that had started it all in apartment 4B. It felt like a lifetime ago. She realized that the mystery of David Miller hadn't just changed her life. It had given her a purpose. She wasn't just a researcher anymore. She was the one holding the light. As they reached the perimeter fence, a spotlight swept over the snow. Movement. A voice shouted from the chateau's balcony. The quiet of the Alps was shattered by the sharp crack of a rifle. The battle for the final truth had begun. The night exploded into a kaleidoscope of muzzle flashes and white tracers. Elena dived behind a heavy stone pillar as the snow around her kicked up in violent sprays. The tactical team provided by Agent Miller returned fire, the suppressed rifles rhythmic and professional. Above them, the Thorn estate loomed, a masterpiece of modern architecture that now looked like a bunker. "Move up. Left flank." The team leader shouted over the wind. David was beside Elena, his face illuminated by a passing flare. He wasn't a soldier, but the weeks of fear had tempered him. He moved with a focused urgency, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the lower terrace. "The server room is beneath the helipad," he yelled to Elena. "If we can reach the maintenance elevator, we can bypass the main lobby." They stayed low, crawling through the waist-deep powder. The cold was a physical weight, numbing their fingers and making every breath a struggle. The Obsidian watchmen were well entrained, positioned on the balconies with thermal scopes. One of the tactical specialists fell to Elena's right, clutching his shoulder. "Don't stop," David urged, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her toward a glass-enclosed stairwell. They reached the door, but it was locked with a reinforced biometric plate. Elena didn't reach for a key. She pulled out the antidote device Julian had given her. It wasn't just a virus carrier. It was a universal bypass tool. She pressed the copper contact points against the reader. The screen flickered, struggling against the obsidian encryption, before turning a steady, beautiful green. The door opened. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of expensive wood polish and ozone. They were in the north wing, a gallery of stolen antiquities and modern art. It was a hall of trophies, a testament to the lives Arthur and Marcus Thorn had ruined to decorate their walls. "Julian, we're inside," Elena whispered into her comms. "I see the power draw." Julian's voice was shaky, the sound of keyboard clicks audible in the background. "The redacted protocol is at 92%. If it hits 100, the corruption becomes permanent. The names on the ledger will be scrambled into an unbreakable cipher. You have maybe 6 minutes." They ran down the marble hallway, their tactical boots leaving wet prints on the pristine floors. At the end of the hall, a heavy mahogany door stood slightly ajar. Elena slowed down, her hand going to the small pistol the embassy team had insisted she carry. She nudged the door open. It wasn't a guard room. It was Marcus Thorn's private study. The man himself was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the battle in the snow as if it were a theatrical performance. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid, his expression one of bored disappointment. "You really are a persistent irritant, Miss Elena." Marcus said without turning around. My brother Arthur was a fool, but even he warned me that you had a certain stubbornness. It's a pity. You could have been a valuable asset to the Obsidian Group. The group is over. Marcus. Elena said, her voice echoing in the large room. The ledger is out. Marcus turned then, a thin smile on his lips. Is it? My redacted protocol is currently rewriting history. By the time your friends at the embassy finish their breakfast, the world will believe that the Obsidian Group was a phantom, and that you and Mr. Miller are the primary architects of a global fraud. The truth is whatever the data says it is. He gestured to a hidden panel in the wall that slid open to reveal a descending staircase. The master terminal is down there. Go ahead. Try to stop the inevitable. It's the most entertaining thing I've seen all winter. Elena and David descended the spiral staircase, the air growing colder and vibrating with a low-frequency hum. This was the basement of all basements, the digital foundation of the Thorn Empire. They emerged into a vast, white room filled with rows of black server racks. Blue and green lights blinked in a chaotic symphony of data processing. In the center of the room stood a circular console. This was the master terminal. On the main monitor, a progress bar glowed an angry orange. Redacted protocol. 96% complete. There. David pointed. They rushed to the console. Elena pulled the silver USB drive from her pocket and plugged it into the primary port. Immediately, the screen turned red. A warning message appeared in 3 different languages. Unauthorized access. Purge initiated. Julian. The system is purging. Elena shouted into her headset. I'm seeing it. Julian replied. The redacted protocol is a two-way street. If you try to stop it, the servers will overheat and melt the hardware. It's a scorched earth policy. I need you to bypass the thermal safeties and inject the antidote directly into the kernel. How do I do that? Find the physical override switch. It's a manual lever, usually red, located behind the cooling intake. Elena scrambled behind the massive server racks, her hands searching through a forest of wires and cables. She found it, a heavy metal lever. She pulled it with all her strength. The hum of the fans died instantly, replaced by a terrifying silence. It's done. Now what? Type the following string. Julian commanded. Echo. Romeo. Alpha. Sierra. Echo. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. As she typed the final letter, a figure stepped out from behind a row of servers. It was Beatrice Vane. She wasn't wearing her elegant wool coat anymore. She was in a tactical suit, her hair loose and her face smeared with soot. She held a short-barreled rifle, and she looked like a woman who had nothing left to lose. Step away from the terminal. Beatrice said. Her voice was no longer melodic. It was a jagged edge. Marcus might find this entertaining, but I built this network. I won't watch a girl from a third-rate apartment building burn it down. It's already burning. Beatrice. David said, stepping in front of Elena. Look at the screen. The progress bar had stopped at 99%. It wasn't moving forward. Instead, the orange light was turning back to blue. The antidote was working, unwinding the corruption and restoring the original names to the ledger. You think you've won? Beatrice laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. The servers are overheating. In 2 minutes, this entire room will be an inferno. You're going to die here with the data. Then at least the world will know why. Elena said, her eyes fixed on Beatrice. The room began to grow hot. The smell of melting plastic filled the air. Warning sirens began to wail, a high-pitched scream that echoed off the white walls. Beatrice raised her rifle, but her eyes weren't on Elena. She was looking at the monitor, watching her own name reappear in the primary defendants column of the ledger. Suddenly, the ceiling groaned. The tactical team had breached the main floor above. A flashbang grenade dropped through the stairwell, exploding in a blinding burst of white light and sound. Elena grabbed the USB drive, the original, now containing the fully restored, decrypted ledger, and pulled David toward the emergency exit. Beatrice Vane disappeared into the smoke and the rising heat of the server racks, a ghost lost in her own crumbling machine. The heat in the server room was no longer just a sensation. It was a physical force, a thick, shimmering wall that tasted of ozone and scorched metal. The sirens had shifted from rhythmic pulses to a single, high-pitched scream of mechanical agony. Elena and David stumbled through the smoke, their lungs burning. Behind them, the servers that had governed a shadow empire were melting into useless slag. But the data, the restored, uncorrupted truth, was safely tucked into Elena's jacket. "This way!" David shouted, pointing toward a maintenance shaft. The main stairs were a chimney of black smoke now, blocked by the collapse of the floor above. They reached the shaft just as a series of explosions rocked the facility. The Obsidian Group's scorched earth policy was thorough. The hardware was literally self-destructing to prevent physical forensic analysis. Elena felt the floor beneath her vibrate and crack. She grabbed a metal ladder, the rungs already hot to the touch, and began to climb. Halfway up the shaft, a hand reached out and grabbed Elena's ankle. She looked down through the haze. It was Beatrice Vane. Her face was a mask of soot and blood, her eyes wide with a terrifying, desperate focus. She didn't have her rifle anymore, but she held a jagged piece of glass. "If I go down," Beatrice hissed, her voice a rattling wheeze. "You go with me. The group is eternal. Elena, you're just a spark in a forest fire." Elena kicked back, her boot connecting with Beatrice's shoulder. "The forest is gone. Beatrice, look around you." David, climbing above Elena, reached down and grabbed Elena's hand, heaving her upward with a desperate surge of strength. Beatrice lost her grip as another explosion shook the shaft. She fell back into the red glow of the server room, disappearing into the smoke as the lower doors finally buckled under the heat. Elena didn't look back. She couldn't. They reached the top of the shaft, bursting out into the freezing alpine air. The contrast was a shock to the system, the ice-cold wind instantly turning their sweat into a layer of frost. The chateau was a silhouette of orange flames against the white peaks. The glass walls were shattering, falling like diamonds into the snow. A tactical transport helicopter hovered 20 yards away, its searchlight cutting through the blizzard. Agent Miller was standing in the open doorway, waving them forward. "The whole mountain is wired," Miller shouted over the roar of the rotors. Marcus Thorne triggered a structural demolition. "We have 30 seconds before the cliffside gives way." They ran. Every step in the deep snow felt like moving through wet cement. They reached the helicopter, and 3 sets of hands pulled them inside just as the ground beneath the chateau groaned. With a sound like a mountain breaking, the entire north wing of the estate slid off the cliff, 1,000,000 tons of stone and glass falling into the abyss. As the helicopter banked away, Elena looked out the window. The Thorn Empire was a scar of fire on the mountain, a dying light in a vast, cold wilderness. She reached into her pocket and felt the USB drive. It was hot, but it was whole. The flight back to the secure airbase in Germany was silent. Elena and David sat huddled under wool blankets, drinking bitter black coffee from tin mugs. They were bruised, burned, and exhausted. But the silence wasn't one of defeat. It was the silence that follows a storm. Julian's voice finally broke through the cabin's intercom. He sounded like he had been crying, but his laughter was infectious. "It's everywhere. Elena. David, it's everywhere." The antidote didn't just restore the names. It triggered an automail to every central bank and major news outlet. The redacted protocol backfired. Because they tried to hide, The system flagged the data as high-priority forensic evidence. Elena opened a laptop provided by the embassy. The world was changing in real time. The headlines were a relentless stream of accountability. The names Elena had seen on the screen in the dark hotel room in Paris were now being read aloud by news anchors in a dozen different languages. The secret infrastructure of the world was being dismantled, brick by digital brick. "We did it," David whispered, leaning his head against the cold vibration of the helicopter's hull. "Everything we lost, everyone they hurt, it actually meant something." "We're not done," Elena said, looking at the screen. "Marcus Thorne isn't in the arrested column yet. He wasn't in the server room. David, he stayed in the study until the end." The tactical team searched the debris, Agent Miller said, joining them in the back of the cabin. She looked at her tablet with a frown. "He's gone." His private jet took off from a hidden hangar on the south slope 5 minutes before the demolition. "We've tracked the tail number to a non-extradition zone in the South Pacific." Elena felt a cold spark of anger. "He thinks he can just retreat to an island and wait for the world to forget." "He can try," Miller said. "But his broke. We didn't just take his secrets. We took his oxygen." Julian emptied every Obsidian account. "The man has no guards, no lawyers, and no friends left. He's a billionaire with $0 and a billion enemies." As the sun began to rise over the European horizon, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold, Elena looked at the original silver USB drive. It had traveled from a dusty cabinet in apartment 4B to the heart of a global conspiracy. "What happens to this now?" she asked. "It goes to the International Court," Miller said. "And you? You go home. Or as close to home as we can provide. You're a hero, Elena. But heroes need to sleep." Elena looked at David. He took her hand, and for the first time in weeks, his smile was genuine. The mystery was no longer a race or a fight. It was, finally, a memory. The months following the Alpine operation were a blur of legal depositions, international testimonies, and a slow, steady return to a world that felt both familiar and entirely new. The global headlines that had once screamed about the Obsidian collapse had transitioned into more somber reports on the lengthy trials taking place in The Hague and New York. Elena found herself a central figure in these proceedings, no longer a woman hiding in the shadows of a Parisian hotel, but a witness whose voice held the power to dismantle a legacy of corruption. Arthur Thorne's trial was the first to conclude. Stripped of his wealth and his influence, he looked small and frail in the courtroom, a shadow of the man who had once terrified David Miller. When the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, Elena felt a quiet sense of relief. But no joy. The damage Thorne had done to the city pension funds and the countless families who relied on them was a scar that would take a generation to heal. David had moved to a quiet cottage by the coast, a place where the air tasted of salt rather than the ozone of server rooms. He spent his days writing a memoir, not for profit, but for the sake of clarity. He and Elena spoke every Sunday evening. They didn't talk about keys or ledgers anymore. They talked about the gardens they were planting and the books they were finally finding the time to read. The FBI found Marcus, David told her during one of these calls, his voice calm. He wasn't on a tropical island. He was hiding in a basement in a suburb of Auckland, trying to trade a stolen Vermeer painting for a fake passport. The painting was flagged the moment he showed it to a dealer. His being extradited tomorrow. The final pillar of the Obsidian Group had fallen. The man who thought he could rewrite history had been undone by a single piece of stolen art, the very thing he used to decorate his vanity. Elena sat in her temporary apartment in D.C., looking out at the city lights. She thought about Beatrice Vane and the man in the grey coat. The physical ruins of the Chateau de Vincennes had yielded no trace of Beatrice, and while some called her a ghost, Elena knew she was a casualty of the very system she had built. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small, red diary. It was battered and the edges were singed from the heat of the Alpine chateau. But the handwriting on the first page was still clear. Property of David Miller. She realized it was time for the diary to go back to the beginning. She had one last trip to make before her story could truly end. The hallway of the old apartment building smelled exactly as it always had, a mixture of floor wax, old wood, and the distant aroma of someone's breakfast. Elena stood in front of the door to apartment 4B, the key heavy in her hand. It wasn't the blue key this time, but the simple, silver one the landlord had given her when she first moved in, a lifetime ago. She stepped inside. The apartment was empty, the furniture she had left behind covered in white dust sheets. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a quiet, ordinary space, a far cry from the glass penthouses of Paris or the stone dungeons of Vincennes. Elena walked to the bookshelf in the corner. She pulled back the dust sheet, revealing the empty space where she had first found the red diary. She reached into her bag and placed the book back in its original spot. Beside it, she laid the blue key and the silver USB drive, now wiped of its dangerous data but still a symbol of the truth they had fought to uncover. "It's done," she whispered to the empty room. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. She saw Mia opening the Sunny Cup across the way, the neon open sign flickering to life. She saw a young couple walking a dog, and an old man reading a newspaper on a bench. The world was moving on, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to a digital dark age. A soft knock came at the door. Elena didn't flinch. She knew the rhythm. 3 soft, steady taps. She opened the door to find David. He looked healthy, his skin tanned from the coastal sun and his eyes clear of the fear that had haunted them for so long. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers and a box of pastries from the bakery down the street. "I thought you might be here," he said, stepping into the room. He looked around at the dusty furniture and the light on the bookshelf. "It looks different than I remember." "It's just an apartment now," Elena said, smiling. "An ordinary apartment in an ordinary city." "What are you going to do now, Elena?" David asked, leaning against the counter where she had once found a map with 3 red circles. "The embassy offered you a permanent position. Sarah Jenkins wants you to join the investigative team at the Gazette." Elena looked at her hands. They were steady now. "I think I've had enough of other people's secrets for a while. I think I'd like to start my own research firm. Something that helps people find things they've lost. Not just documents, but their own stories." They stood together by the window, watching the city wake up. The mystery of David Miller had begun with a missing man and a hidden diary, but it had ended with the discovery of a strength Elena never knew she possessed. She realized that the truth wasn't just a ledger or a key. It was the courage to look into the shadows and refuse to turn away. As they walked out of apartment 4B and locked the door behind them, Elena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The shadows were gone, and the morning light was everywhere.